Welcome back to the channel. This is Trendy Storm and you are watching What If Naruto Became a Weapon by an Old Man in the Shadows. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Naruto Uzumaki had once again failed his academy exams. In the end, it had been a straightforward Bunshin jutsu. Gods, he detested the method his black-haired, emaciated clone struggled weakly before dispelling itself. It was really annoying. He had been trying to master the fundamentals on his own for hours every day, but it was never good enough. He ran into the woods to practice until he passed out, even after failing the test a second time. If the blonde child could be described in one word, it would be that he was obstinate to the point of being stupid. Naruto was about to resume his fruitless training regimen when he woke up, covered in dew, at the crack of dawn, but he saw someone else moving around in a small clearing in the woods. If it were possible, the elderly man was even older than the old man Hokage. He ignored the cold by dressing simply in a white t-shirt, black trousers, and black slippers in contrast to his advanced age. The white-haired elderly man wielded a seemingly simple one-handed sword with deadly dexterity. There was the faint tracery of innumerable scars from innumerable battles on his leathery, tanned skin. Despite his short stature, he was sinewy. The elderly man seemed to have been reduced to the bare core of an experienced murderer. It was evident in the way he moved and looked. Despite the fact that the man was 11 years old, Naruto felt uneasy just watching him practice. It was like being in the rare company of an enraged sandaime, despite the fact that the man didn't say anything to him or even look at him. The young boy shivered, unable to control it, despite his youth and inexperience. "What do you want, boy?" the elderly man said out loud in a gravelly voice as he halted his movements. The young Jinchuriki had thought back to all the occasions in the past when he had approached strangers for help or a fair deal and had, at best, been ignored. He had to try, even though this was probably going to be no different. Naruto swallowed his pride and plucked up the courage to respond. "Gramps, please teach me how to fight." The elderly man chuckled. It sounded like glass shattering. He regarded the blonde with the whiskers with a chuckle, as though he were balancing his soul on an unseen scale. The elderly man muttered something to himself after a brief pause. Smirking, he said, "You've got a giant pair of balls to ask me that, kid, but I've got no time for playground games. I don't fight, I kill, and I survive to keep on killing." It was stated simply, if not brutally, and without any hints of boasting. Naruto was completely chilled by the old man's candor. Naruto knew instinctively that he was standing at a precipice. He might leap in one direction or the other, changing his life forever. Naruto clicked in a deep place. It was the same area that had withstood all of the apathy, the loneliness, and the unsaid animosity. Naruto desired a significant change in his life. "Whatever you want to teach, I'll learn," the boy concluded. The young boy's declaration made the old man blush. He sensed that the child was one of the few with a good heart. Only time would tell if he had the fortitude to withstand this kind of training. Like a shark detecting blood in the water, the elderly man grinned. "It's not going to be that easy, boy. Unlike the styles of the lazy Hyuga clan or the thieving Uchiha, my art has to be ingrained in the body and paid for with the flesh and blood of yourself and others. Are you prepared for that?" Naruto gave a forceful nod. The elderly gentleman continued, "I only have a few conditions. Do what I say when I tell you to do it, without complaint, and do not quit if you fail on either count. Your training will cease immediately. Lastly, if you abuse my teachings, I will gut you like a fish, and I'll do so with the Hokage's blessing. You understand?" Despite being dumbfounded, Naruto was able to respond positively. "What is your name, boy?" "Uzumaki Naruto." Recognition swept across that man's face. "That's a respectable name. Mine is San. Let's begin." A tiny piece of paper materialized in the old man's hands, and his sword disappeared like a shuriken. He hurled it at Naruto. The student from the academy caught it and gazed at it in perplexity. "Trust me on this, boy, and gather some chakra into it." The little boy's face took on the appearance of constipation as he collected his strength. All of a sudden, the paper split in two where the paper had been cut neatly. It left tiny, painful cuts on his fingers. "Very good. It's in your nature to cut. This will be perfect," San said with a smile. As two single-edged, razor-sharp knives materialized in San's worn hands, Naruto wondered in his mind what the old man meant by perfection. "Before I can teach you how to kill, Naruto, you've got to learn how to cheat death now. Avoid getting cut or stabbed. This will teach you distance, timing, accuracy, and sensitivity." The elderly man charged at him, launching a fluid attack. Dealing with the knive's shifting grips and angles of attack was a nightmare. Soon, Naruto was covered in pinprick stab wounds and minor cuts. After mostly dodging, Naruto attempted to counter a knife strike with a standard Academy taijutsu block. He sustained a deep cut below his nose and above his upper lip as a result of it scraping against his gums. Even though he was crying, he kept avoiding. The elderly gentleman said, "Don't try to resist my blows force to force. If you try to counter my fluidity with brute force, you will direct my knives to your weakest areas, and you will die." Naruto became more and more terrified. San had no qualms about demonstrating that he was capable of killing him brutally. Naruto's left cheek was cut by a knife that flashed out. His cheek flapped out, revealing his mouth's contents to the outside world. After the blow broke the elastic tissue, feeling his tongue pierce his face's bloody muscles, the boy clutched his face in disbelief. The boy was stunned and froze. San stabbed him in the stomach, causing it to tear viciously. "If you get distracted by your injuries, you will die," the elderly man said, observing him calmly. After San tore his long knife from Naruto's abdomen, the young child emptied his bowels and bladder before losing consciousness. San immediately went to work, covering Naruto's dying body with his hands while muttering a prayer. Without touching him, the boy suffered severe injuries that soon healed and turned into pale pink lines. The elderly gentleman was ignorant of medical jutsu. He had a single technique for healing wounds miraculously, but only if they had been caused by his own will and energy. His uncle had trained and cured him using the same method decades before. Although its range of healing was severely constrained, it was useful many times. He cleaned up his young pupil almost tenderly, throwing away the dirty rags and replacing them with freshly called upon garments in muted shades of gray and black. San observed the minor scars disappearing considerably more quickly than normal as he waited for his young pupil to regain consciousness. San felt the impulse to explain when Naruto's intense black eyes met Naruto's bright blue ones with fear and horror. "That is what it means to learn my art of killing. It will not get any easier if you learn to the best of your ability. I will teach to the best of mine. I will never, ever harm you permanently. Unless you betray my teachings, I will not abandon you, and I expect you to do the same." San anticipated that the child would shit out like everyone else. Few people had the right mindset to apply these lessons, and even fewer had the constitution to do so. Rather, Naruto's eyes grew wide with comprehension. In reality, the white-haired old man was being kind rather than cruel. San was recognizing him. His art simply could not be taught in a kind manner. "You've got yourself a deal, Gramps." Astonished, the old man took the young boy's outstretched hand. This young child would persevere through his training and succeed. San relied on the instincts that had sustained him over the years. "Let's go get some food, my treat," the blonde applauded, then took note of his clothing. "Hey, what the hell happened to my clothes?" Through his crystal ball, the third Hokage observed these happenings. He was grinning in a way that had not been seen in a long time. He grimaced at the cruelty of San's training, but the outcome was undeniable. San had good reason to be a veteran of the great ninja wars. The Hokage muttered, "So the executioner finally has a new apprentice. Good luck, young Naruto," with a hint of amusement. Naruto and San began training at first light every weekday, and it quickly became a habit. To get up on time, Naruto had even started staying at the enigmatic old man's bare apartment. San's worn-out couch had become a familiar place for the blonde orphan to sleep. After training him, the elderly man would routinely buy him a substantial breakfast. Unaccustomed to this kind of treatment, Naruto always made sure to thank him. San asked Naruto to conceal the specifics of his training for the time being. In silence, Naruto vowed never to turn on the elderly man who had recognized him. The majority of Naruto's training now involved a mental exercise he called tag. This was the same exercise the white-haired man had forced upon him at their first encounter. The old man was always the attacker in this game of attack and defense, and Naruto was a piece of meat that needed to be cut up. Throughout the exercise, the old man always carried his knives, but the games changed every day and time. He occasionally had very little room to dodge because the terrain was constantly changing. He had to adjust the way his body was positioned. The retired ninja would occasionally hold a single knife in each hand and use the empty hand and the rest of his body to either pull Naruto dangerously close or to overcome his weak defenses. Naruto became accustomed to being trampled underfoot, elbowed, headbutted, and swept off his feet, but he still had to contend with a knife or two that threatened to gut him and frequently succeeded. The old man never drew Naruto's blood without repeating a lesson throughout all of this. The old man swore, knives slicing the air, trying to instill in the boy the nuances of evasion. "Flank me. Goddammit. Don't back up in a straight line, you'll run out of space as I rush you down. Move so that I've got to readjust to your position strike after strike," he said. San hissed, drawing a line of red at Naruto's brow and causing blood to trickle into the boy's eyes. "If caught in a place where you can't evade, parry just enough to remain behind the force of my attack. Any lack of subtlety on your part will get you cut and killed. Be invisible," he said. The boy was becoming quick and cunning. "Relax. Boy, you can't expect to survive my attacks. Panic strike and calm yourself and breathe deeply. As a result, the boy learned to remain composed in the face of peril, regardless of whether he was bleeding, gutted, blinded, or disabled. Not that old man San didn't have a sense of humor when he was training. Generally speaking, Naruto had little chance of enjoying himself if the elderly man was enjoying himself while training him. The old man would occasionally single out a single spot on Naruto's body, such as his right eye socket. To emphasize a lesson 1 training session, San took a single knife in his right hand and spun it in his palm into an ice pick grip to remind the boy to control his temper. Then, looking for any sign of a tantrum, he struck the boy's right eye with the pommel. It was the most rudimentary form of aversion treatment. San disclosed that he was always within range of pushing his knife blade past the blonde's eye socket and into his brain if he decided to switch to a forward grip after his student's face became swollen and bruised. Anger will only get you and your loved ones killed, San said, his voice heavy with memories. It was just one of many crucial lessons Naruto would learn. Some of Naruto's classmates were aware of the consequences of his training. Hyuga Hinata observed her crush arriving at class exhausted since no teacher other than Iruka-sensei bothered to wake him up. She frequently witnessed him dozing off during entire classes. As if something else had caught his attention, the blonde's tricks that she had secretly found funny had become rare despite widespread disbelief and disapproval. Uzumaki Naruto remained confident and enthusiastic about his dream of becoming Hokage. For her, that was the most important thing. Naruto's new dull clothes with only faint orange accents were not the only thing that caught Inuzuka Kiba's attention. He and Akamaru both noticed the subtle bloody smell most of the time near Naruto he always had at. Kiba usually didn't give a damn about the dead last student in his class, but the frequent occurrences bothered him enough to ask once what was going on. Kiba's curiosity was temporarily satiated when Naruto merely replied, "Training." Iruka observed minor adjustments in his most problematic and, if forced to confess, his favorite student. Along with his mischievous behavior, the blonde boy had become somewhat more composed. Strangely enough, Naruto's typical boasts now possessed a certain sincere sense of pride and were less like posturing. Outside of practices, Naruto thought San was a kind and patient elderly man. Instead of complaining, he encouraged Naruto to ask questions. Naruto used the opportunity to learn more about his teacher and the art he was learning during their meals together. "Why do we train the way we do?" the whiskered boy asked during one of their first meals together. After a moment of contemplation, the elderly shinobi responded, "I am putting you through hell now, because it is best that you get put through the paces during practice, rather than against someone who won't hesitate to kill you for real. Also, before you learn how to kill, it is helpful to experience the kinds of pain you will soon learn to inflict, so that you won't end up using your skills thoughtlessly." Naruto gave a contemplative nod. It was logical. The blonde would never recklessly injure another person by spilling his entrails or gouging out his eye because he knew what it was like to have those things done. It was similar to how the old man Hokage, frustrated by a huge practical joke, had wished for him to be more responsible. San went on, "What you are learning now in your flesh, blood, and bones is a deft touch. The Hyuga clan in Konoha has a style of taijutsu known as the Juken or gentle fist. Are you familiar with them?" The old man sighed at the young boy's lack of knowledge as he shook his head. "Their goddamn style isn't gentle at all. They have a bloodline advantage that allows them to strike at their opponent's vital points directly with chakra compared to what I'm trying to drill into you. They're clumsy oafs that allow much more room for error." "Huh, what are you saying?" asked Uzumaki Naruto, perplexed. "Boy, what happens when you fuck up when I attack you?" The blonde assumed a contemplative pose, bringing his right index finger to his lip. "I end up cut or stabbed, blinded, missing fingers, coughing up pieces of my lungs." Naruto began listing all of the severe wounds he had sustained while being taught by San with his fingers. The elderly gentleman interrupted, "Don't you get it? The stakes are so much higher for you than a Hyuga in training. The worst injuries a Hyuga gets is closed tenketsu, or chakra points. It feels like pins and needles compared to the shit I put you through." Sighing, Naruto said, "I wish I were a Hyuga." "Enough of that bullshit. Boy, the defenses I'm teaching you will far outshine any cheap bloodline tricks. If you get this right, you'll learn how not to be touched by damn near any attack. Not a kick, punch, weapon, or even chakra strike will injure you. You'll be a goddamn ghost. All you need is a deft touch." The blonde's eyes widened, getting ridiculously big. "Gramps, will this involve some crazy awesome teleportation jutsus?" San gave a mocking snort. "Nope, just good old-fashioned complete tactile mastery of timing, space, and distance. Also an inhuman sense of self-preservation, bordering on precognition. It's how I survived at my age, being a frontline fighter against the nine-tailed fox demon." Looking at his student's somewhat tempered enthusiasm, San said, "Cheer up, brat. We haven't even started to learn about offense. Naruto gave his all to his training, and the outcomes after a few weeks were self-evident. What would typically cause the boy to sustain deep wounds instead caused shallower cuts. Any attack that would have caused shallow wounds only caused him to be grazed, and what would have grazed him before he completely avoided it? Observing the boy's development, San nodded to himself. The type of damage that Uzumaki Naruto had been absorbing would soon be ready to be dealt out. As the Yondaime's legacy grew more skilled, Sarutobi watched San's pet project and noticed that he winced less and less. However, it required a unique type of nin to regularly injure a child and refer to it as training. Special Junin Mitarashi Anko sneezed violently, throwing snot over an order of dango, as a result of the Sandame's errant thought. Uzumaki Naruto's training in the arts of war frequently caused San to experience oddly sentimental feelings. It occasionally made him think back on his lengthy life in order to prevent making the same mistakes he had in the past. Sandame was a couple of years younger than San. This implied that the number of people in Konoha who could share memories with him was quite small. The person he was closest to spent most of his time managing a village. San could recall that some courageous nin had battled, bled, and died for every square foot of the village hidden in the leaves. The elderly man thought about his longtime friend from the great shinobi wars and beyond. In fact, Sarutobi was as deserving of the moniker, the Professor, as San was of the title, the Executioner. Sarutobi was referred to as the Professor due to his unquestionable ninjutsu expertise and wisdom. The first Hokage would simply shrug as though saying, "Fuck if I know," we're too much trouble if you were to question him about how he came to be proficient in Mokuton Jutsu. To get you to stop asking the questions, he might summon a wooden vacation home. However, Sarutobi would gleefully extrapolate theories regarding extreme Doten and Suiten alignments. He was always a bit of a jutsu nerd. San was well aware that he was not a bookworm. The man was a fierce combatant who combined an unimaginable number of different elemental attacks into a terrifying whole. San earned the moniker, the Executioner, for his actions toward Konoha's adversaries. Few ninja who attempted to compete with him survived, and none were unharmed, despite the fact that he was not the Sandame's jutsu monster. On the battlefield, a moniker like the Assassin did not suit his style because it suggested that he had to move stealthily to stay safe. San could approach a whole group of enemy nin and either guarantee their slaughter or demand their surrender. Even within the boundaries of Konoha, he was a mysterious boogeyman due to his extensive covert successes. San was very skilled at guerrilla warfare and stealth. One of his specialties was sneaking into enemy camps and killing Konoha traders who worked with the enemy. Unless the trader had a Kekkei Genkei, he would frequently leave the trader's eyes, ears, and tongue back at the enemy camp. People are compelled to give you a nickname if you do that frequently enough. In contrast to Iwa nins and their sworn enemy, the Yondaime, people in the early decades of shinobi combat did not have to be particularly inventive in their names. The young man had initially found the moniker, the Yellow Flash, completely too awesome, but by the end of his reign, he had thoroughly earned it. The blonde was really tough. San had nothing but the utmost respect for the young man after seeing him willingly have his soul torn out to save his village. Training his legacy as best he could would be the least San could do. San quickly recognized the lonely, undernourished blonde child as Konoha's resident Jinchuriki. During their first encounter in the woods, a dead giveaway were the whisker marks. The children were incredibly brave. Even today, San knew that the majority of Konoha's population still avoided Naruto when he took the children out for meals. San had a feeling Sarutobi had a secret master plan for the child. Screw that. San had a clear goal. The child was open about wanting to be Hokage. San could already see that the blonde would one day be a huge asset to the community. San would shape him into a monster, the kind that would make Konohagakure's more obstinate residents shudder. San gave himself a sly smile. After all these years, it would be interesting to see if that snotty punk Danzo was still a bedwetter. San stopped practice one October morning to ask his young pupil a question. "Do you know why I'm teaching you to dodge knives instead of swords, or any other weapons?" Naruto stopped his dodging to reflect for a moment. He made a wild guess. "I dunno, don't most ninjas carry kunai?" "Not at all. Boy, therein lies a secret to what I'm teaching you. At hand-to-hand close combat range, I can change my angles of attack with a small knife much faster than with a sword. The longer weapon needs more distance and time. You are being pressed to learn to deal with more attacks at a shorter distance with less room for error." In Naruto's mind, something seemed to click. So the closer an attack is to me, the more danger I'm in. San grinned. "It seems like you're finally catching on." The old man's rare compliment made Naruto smile. The elderly man made the bold decision to pose yet another significant query. "Boy, what do you think is the basis of the defensive style you are learning right now?" The blonde child replied confidently, "That's easy speed and strength." Absolutely. Sen already had a hand behind his neck in a, "ah, shucks" gesture, and Naruto was expecting another bit of rare praise. Wrong. What do you mean, Gramps? Isn't that all you need? Sen's ability to control his urge to strike Naruto in the head was impressive. No, the basis of this style is precision. That's the reason I'm not having you do chakra exercises yet, or wearing weights. It's why we're training with razor-sharp weapons. An academy student who was feeling down said, "What about being strong and fast?" Precision must be ingrained before gaining strength or speed. They can always be added later, but my art requires an extremely high level of precision that is impossible for someone who already possesses great amounts of speed and strength to learn. How does that translate to fighting? A curious Naruto inquired. San smiled like a shark once more. With this kind of precision in mind, you'll become a scalpel rather than a cudgel, and be able to accomplish more with 1 square foot of space than a so-called taijutsu specialist could with 10 feet of space. Trust me, it will all make sense when you start fighting other people. San brought a small package wrapped in brown paper to his hands and threw it to the boy. Having only gotten presents from the Hokage and Iruka-sensei, Naruto was in disbelief. He was so ecstatic that he ripped open the package. "This is why I asked you about the foundation of your defenses today. Happy birthday." After giving his old teacher the most intense embrace his 12-year-old arms could muster, Naruto proceeded to inspect his new set of knives. They had single-edged, matte black blades and a straightforward, almost elegant, design. Different grips were made possible by the comfortable, textured handles. They were roughly a foot long overall, with spear points on each blade. Like the elderly man instructing Naruto, they were deadly and practical. "Hey, do you want to gawk at them all day or do you want to learn how to use them?" San laughed. Looking almost comically serious, the blonde boy declared, "I'm here to learn." San gave himself permission to laugh and then returned to his seriousness. "Naruto, I need to teach you about my uncle first. The man who taught me how to kill. Understanding his intentions in creating the art we practice now is even more important than learning any specific technique." San's history classes were usually both highly entertaining and violent, so Naruto paid close attention. A person who experienced those events firsthand would be far more fascinating than a textbook. San inhaled deeply before disclosing, for what was likely the first time, the true source and purpose of his art. It wouldn't make for a pleasant tale. San started out with a dejected, distant expression as the elderly man spoke. Naruto saw that his dark eyes had a slight twinkle. "My uncle was raised in a harsh and lawless era prior to the establishment of large shinobi villages. Bandits and ninjas roamed around villages, big and small, harassing them, usually plundering, raping, and killing without retaliation unless a village could afford mercenaries or had its own private army. One of these gangs attacked his family in a smaller village, killing his father and leaving his mother and sister barely alive due to the gang's savagery. My uncle joined a mercenary band when he was roughly your age because he had few other options and needed to support his family. His mother and sister would live in a larger, fortified village, and he would earn his keep on the battlefield to provide for them. One day, a crude explosive trap tore off his left arm below the elbow and mangled his left leg, leaving him with a severe limp. It also killed several of his fellow mercenary nins. If he couldn't find a way to earn a living, his family would eventually run out of money and be left to fend for themselves without the safety of a large village. He adjusted. Most ninjutsu and genjutsu were too difficult for him to perform with just one hand, but weapons and taijutsu were not. People would frequently teach him out of duty or sympathy as he traveled, battled, and learned throughout the elemental countries. Naruto was forced to interrupt. "How did your uncle become a ninja with his injuries?" San grinned. That cunning old bastard put all he had learned together and managed to gain complete control over his body and chakra, as well as to become incredibly accurate and proficient in his movements and chakra usage. He was technically at a significant disadvantage against almost everyone he encountered, but his mentality was what made him incredibly deadly, even legendary. The fundamental idea behind our fighting style is to eliminate every opponent you come across, regardless of their advantages and your disadvantages. Our enemies have the luxury of being sloppy compared to ourselves because they have perfectly functioning bodies, which is why they die in large numbers before us. We always assume that our opponents will be faster, stronger, more skilled, in better health, and have more experience than ourselves, but we will still kill them. By the time I'm done with you, you'll have learned to be a vicious bastard and to take nothing for granted with ease and grace." San gave Naruto a nod. "Pick up your knives, boy, it's time to put theory into practice." Naruto's prior training with San was surpassed by the subsequent training. Initially, Naruto got to know the knives San gave him very well. Eventually, Naruto's knives began to feel as organic as his facial hair. He was able to switch between basic knife grips more quickly than he could execute hand seals. Edge out, blade up, edge in, blade up, edge out, blade down, edge in, blade down. These grips were hammerada and frequently stabbada into him in the most effective and efficient ways. Edge out, blade up, edge in, blade up, edge out, blade down, edge in, blade down. With his knives, the boy picked up a variety of skills, such as how to change grips by spinning the weapons in his palms and how to stealthily switch grips in the middle of a blow. The boy gained knowledge of anatomy and its connection to his methods. He received instruction from San on how to strike in order to maim, cripple, immobilize, and strike in situations where death could not be avoided by a tourniquet or a trained medic nin by tearing and stabbing. The Jinchuriki learned to make ragged wounds that, if they healed at all, could not be cleaned using a tiny 2-inch blade. Naruto learned how to disembowel a man with the least amount of effort, even one with a belly like an Akamichi. On one occasion, Naruto had questioned San about why they only used single-edged knives rather than the more hazardous double-edged ones. San's responses were consistently about precision and control. By using different parts of his body as fulcrums against the backs of his blades, he learned how to switch grips and increase the force of his strikes. He learned how to use knife tactics and strategy, how to use defensive reactions to bring someone down, and how to confuse his own predictive abilities with those of advanced ninjas and dujutsu users. San gave this crucial piece of counsel. Don't rely on just one attack or basic combination of strikes. You have got to move and react with your enemy like a dancing partner, or even a lover that you will ultimately have to kill if you get preoccupied with doing a particular technique. They will predict your actions and cut you a new smile through your throat. Move with them like a shadow would. San later removed the knives from his grasp and showed him how to use his accuracy and knowledge without them. As San taught Naruto how and where to strike, as well as how to cause a spiral fracture of the spine in 3 places with a single smooth movement, Naruto discovered that his hands and reactions were even faster. Up until now, Naruto has learned all of these things without using chakra. Naruto kept his weapons in his backpack at San's request and did not yet brandish them in public. Additionally, he continued to keep his training sessions with San a secret. Frequently bored, Naruto plodded through his academy work. He only made noticeable progress in throwing kunai. He mostly avoided, occasionally placing a flat palm firmly along exposed vital areas, even in the few times he was paired with a classmate for taijutsu exercises. Though no one really understood what he was doing, his partners would sometimes become irate and chastise him for fleeing. If he had a knife, he would have trained the same distance to sink his blade all the way to the hilt. He was mentally splitting them up as they moved. The blonde boy practiced basic academy jutsu and chakra in his free time. He was still unable to master the fundamental bunshin technique, but his henge and kawarimi were fine. Gods, he detested that method. Naruto even tried channeling chakra into his knives once, but he wisely chose to wait for San to properly teach him after almost severing his own head and severing his kitchen table in 2. Naruto bitterly told San about his struggles with the fundamentals of bunshin jutsu. "Don't worry about that jutsu, boy, I'll show you one better," the elderly man said with a laugh. The little boy became giddy and glittery-eyed. "Really? Yeah, I guess it's just about that time." After teaching Naruto offensive techniques for weeks and months, San started teaching him how to use chakra. San had Naruto practice the tree walking and water walking on his own in private after teaching him for a full week. When they thought he had sufficiently mastered these techniques, they started playing their perverted game of tag on the water. Horrible knife wounds were the only thing that could disrupt the focus required for water sparring, so it greatly aided Naruto in developing his chakra control. Naruto could finally produce good bunshin, which was the best part for the blonde. It was easy for Uzumaki Naruto to see how their training sessions became much more intense. San made every effort to disadvantage Naruto during the spar, making him depend on himself whether or not he had weapons. San unexpectedly fulfilled his pledge to demonstrate to Naruto a jutsu superior to the fundamental bunshin one day. He accomplished this by viciously using it on him. A solid clone sprang from the water's surface, catching Naruto with a hooking thrust just below his jaw as he was dodging the old man's blows. Naruto's tongue and the roof of his mouth were pierced by the clone's knife as it slid behind his jawbone. The coppery taste of blood filled Naruto's mouth, catching him like a fish wriggling on a line. San informed Naruto that the method was known as the cage bunshin after bandaging the boy's injuries. Its approach is the opposite of a regular bunshin. It requires loads of chakra, and is good for people with large amounts of chakra like yourself. The technique is also great for information gathering. If a clone is dispelled, you receive its memories. San challenged the boy to put a significant amount of chakra into the jutsu after teaching him the theoretical aspects of the technique. Never one to cut corners, Naruto expended as much chakra as he could, engulfing their practice area in blondes. San was taken aback when he noticed the blonde boy was hardly tired. "Well, fuck, I guess it's time for a break." San showed up with a package in the Hokage's office. He greeted his longtime companion. "Sarutobi, I assume you know what I've been up to for the past few months." The professor gave a kind smile. "I don't think you could have picked a better pro to copyright than our young Naruto." The elderly man gave a snort. "Yeah, I wish could spend more time teaching him, but I feel my allotted time growing short." San threw a rather heavy bundle at the Sandame. "This is for the boy in case something happens to me." Without a word, the Hokage took the bundle. It had been nearly a year since Naruto first met San and when he learned the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. The third chance for Uzumaki Naruto to pass the academy exams was drawing near. San simply gave Naruto a menacing smile before responding when he was asked how much of his talent he could demonstrate during his tests. "Go nuts, kid," Naruto, hardly able to control his excitement, rocked back and forth on his heels. Naruto was eager to get started on the upcoming academy exams. Many of his classmates thought he was an overly enthusiastic person and wondered why. To an overwhelmingly uninterested audience, Naruto proudly declared, "I am going to kick so much ass today they'll have to make me Hokage." Akamichi Choji and Inuzuka Kiba watched in amusement as Hyuga Hinata silently encouraged her crush, while the others appeared mainly irritated or as though they could not care less. The blonde was completely unconcerned. Naruto thought back on all the training he had to conceal, how he bled and put in more effort than he ever imagined. San only recently began teaching him the fundamentals of chakra imbuing his knives. Naruto was fortunate, the old man explained, because he had a wind element alignment, which allowed him to learn how to use his energy as a weapon to pierce and cut. He had practiced dealing lethal blows to a skilled human target just this morning by battling San's Kage Bunshins, but it was painful to battle multiple evil old men. San promised to get Naruto a new outfit with orange in it if the blonde did well on the test before Naruto left for the academy like a cherry on top of a fudge sundae. Naruto would appreciate the additional motivation even though he didn't really need it. The gray-haired instructor Mizuki moved to the middle of the room and addressed all of the potential genin. "This year's exam will consist of two main parts, a jutsu portion where you demonstrate your mastery of henge, kourimi, and bunshin, and a taijutsu portion where you demonstrate your proficiency in hand-to-hand combat." As soon as possible, the students formed a line to show off their abilities. When it was Uchiha Sasuke's turn, many of the girls in the class applauded him as he executed his techniques perfectly. Mizuki and Iruka gave the dark-haired boy a lot of praise for making 5 bunshin with a single hand seal. He appeared to be quite proud of himself by the end. Students came and went, some of them succeeding, some failing. Finally, it was Naruto Uzumaki's turn this time. Amino Iruka genuinely hoped his favorite student would pass. The scarred Chunin was aware that Naruto was a decent young man who would one day accomplish great things for the village. Mizuki merely observed without comment. Naruto did his kourimi flawlessly. In a shout, Iruka said, "Naruto, henge into either myself or Mizuki." Following instructions, Naruto changed into an exact replica of his favorite teacher and exuded white smoke. Naruto cut Iruka off before she could finish the final and most challenging section of the jutsu test. "Wait. I've got one more for extra credit." The blonde examinee changed into a cute, busty, ponytailed brunette with another puff of smoke. The woman's attractiveness was enhanced by a noticeable scar across the bridge of her delicate nose. She was dressed in a typical Chunin vest, black, skin-tight shorts, and ninja sandals under that vest. She wore nothing else. After licking her full lips, the brunette walked confidently in the direction of the astonished Chunin. She started unzipping her vest slowly. "Iruka-sensei, about that extra credit." The 12-year-old blonde boy was left smiling as the henge vanished. "I get it." A red-faced Iruka was not pleased with Naruto's antics, which caused the students in the room to laugh a lot. The Chunin let out a sigh. Naruto appeared to have a natural tendency to pull practical jokes. "Just create at least 2 bunshins, Naruto, that will be all." Naruto silently made 2 flawless clones of himself without using any hand seals. Mizuki appeared somewhat agitated, as though he had just consumed some sour milk, Naruto observed. Iruka was impressed and relieved. "Great work. Naruto, you've improved a lot over this past year. You passed this portion of the exam." Naruto gave a loud cheer. Iruka was even more taken aback when Naruto's clones applauded his achievement before they were dismissed. They gave him a back pat and gave him a round of high fives when Iruka saw Naruto's clones rubbing against his body. She gaped. The bodies of those clones were made of flesh and blood. The Chunin mentally noted that he should ask Naruto where he had acquired such a sophisticated skill. It wasn't just Amino Iruka who noticed Uzumaki Naruto's Bunshin's peculiar features. Uchiha Sasuke narrowed his eyes and clenched his fists as he watched the blonde. For the taijutsu portion of the test, the students were escorted outdoors to the academy courtyard. Iruka spoke to his students here. You will be chosen, at random, to spar with another of your classmates. No weapons or lethal attacks. You will fight until submission or knockout, or until 5 minutes has passed. We will interfere if a match becomes too one-sided. Do we need to win to pass? A smaller student nervously asked, raising a hand. No, not at all. Just make a good showing, and you'll do fine. Good luck to you all. Students either made a good impression or did not when their names were called. Before long, just 2 names remained. Mizuki rattled off the final 2 names while clutching a clipboard. Uchiha Sasuke, the academy teacher, nearly scoffed. And Uzumaki Naruto. When Iruka learned that the top academy student would compete against the student with the lowest grades, she became a little worried. The fans of Sasuke cheered. This is not even going to be fair. Sasuke'll cream him, said Yamanaka Ino. Sakura Haruno shouted, kick his ass, Sasuke-kun. By this point, some parents had arrived to watch the matches because it was later in the day for the final Uchiha. Many of them gave a loud cheer. Few people publicly expressed their support for the Jinchuriki, but some, like Inuzuka Sume, cheered for them inwardly because they liked underdog wins. Sasuke addressed his opponent in a condescending manner, just as he did with the majority of his peers. Are we going to start or not? In the middle of the courtyard designated as the examination area, Naruto confronted his opponent. Any final words? Dead last. To everyone's surprise, Naruto had learned a lot more from San than just how to fight. He also learned the fine art of swearing rather well. He would share his knowledge with the world on special occasions like this one. Naruto smiled his brightest smile at Sasuke. Go suck a spiked cock, Sasuke-chan. With a happy expression on his face, the blonde flipped off his opponent. An angry, flushed Uchiha Sasuke was a rare sight for the audience members who were paying attention. Nara Shikamaru let out a moan. Nothing good would come of this. Begin! Mizuki shouted, then backpedaled away from the approaching carnage. With the intention of dismantling his opponent piece by piece, Sasuke charged at him. It all went wrong by the smallest of margins. The blonde avoided his fastest of blows despite Naruto's close proximity. The Uchiha repeatedly failed to tag him. It felt like battling the wind. Frustrated, Sasuke screamed, "Fight back, god damn it." With a cunning grin, Naruto obeyed. He just gave San his best impression. Sasuke delivered a forceful right punch to the obnoxious blonde's jaw, but Naruto moved in unison with the motion, sidestepping with a deft parry with his left hand at the same time. He countered with his right. It was a fluid motion, as though they had spent their entire lives preparing a dance. It appeared to onlookers that Sasuke had just jumped straight onto Naruto's fingers. The Uchiha's eyes watered and his vision became blurry as the blonde actually responded with a straightforward eye poke to the right eye socket. The blonde used the momentum of Sasuke's fall and gravity to viciously follow up his initial counter by sweeping his opponent off his feet, grabbing him by the neck, and then slamming the back of his head on the ground. It happened all too quickly, as though popping something would earn him a prize. Naruto spun around and stomped hard on Sasuke's groin. Before Mizuki recovered enough to end the match, the blonde even managed a series of kicks to the vomiting boy's ribs. Sasuke's fangirls were unable to comprehend what had happened, and the onlookers were stunned into total silence. Akamichi Choji was about to eat a potato chip when he dropped it. The savagery of Naruto's match even made Hinata wince. Having not witnessed such a brutal beating since, well, ever, Kiba cheered. Naruto was dragged aside by Iruka. Did you know that if you messed up with the eye jab, you could have blinded him permanently, Naruto? Yep, the blonde replied with a smile and his hands behind his head. Sometimes, I just don't know what to do with you, the scarred Chunin, with his hands raised in the air, said in frustration. Ultimately, Sasuke Uchiha limped forward, clutching his battered groin, to obtain his Hite Ite, while Naruto proudly accepted his. The best he could do was a pained grimace as he attempted to glare at Naruto. A first-year student named Gichi, who had spiky brown hair and was on the verge of crying because he had failed the exams, caught Naruto's attention. Naruto went to console him because he understood how painful this particular failure was, but Mizuki beat him to the punch. The boy with the whiskers thought, "Wow, Mizuki-sensei isn't being a dick now. I've seen everything." After treating his student to a well-earned meal at Ichiraku's Ramen, Uruka was about to ask the blonde about the abilities she demonstrated during the exams when a fellow Chunin interrupted. Uruka were on high alert. Apparently someone had stolen the forbidden scroll of seals. We need your help. Uruka excused himself and drove quickly to track down the offender. Naruto followed. Out of view, Amino Uruka, who was canvassing a portion of the woods around Konoha, happened to stumble upon Mizuki as the gray-haired nin was cleaning a bloodied kunai off his victim's clothing. Gichi's throat was cut from ear to ear, and his face was frozen in a rictus of fear. The air was thick with the smell of blood. Uruka stared in shock at the heinous deed before spotting a big scroll thrown aside. Why Mizuki? For power. You piece of trash, the nin with the gray hair scoffed. Well, if it isn't the do-gooder and the demon brat. Startled, Uruka turned to see his blonde pupil a few steps away. The blonde's tear-streaked eyes were visible to the scarred Chunin even from this distance. Even though Naruto and Gichi were not close, it still hurt to see his life taken in an unnecessary manner. Mizuki kept talking while making fun of the newcomers. This little shit was too sloppy in retrieving the scroll. I had to silence him. The haughty nin spoke to the blonde boy. I was counting on you to fail. Naruto, I have always hated you and I wanted you dead. Instead of Gichi, you were the nine-tailed fox demon that the fourth Hokage failed to kill 12 years ago. You killed my family along with Uruka's parents as well. All around Naruto, the world collapsed. The hatred, the loneliness, the Clarissa, all of it made sense. As he was about to lose it, Uzumaki Naruto begged Uruka, one of his few pillars of support, to help him. Uruka-sensei, am I truly a monster? It didn't even take Uruka a second to react. Naruto, definitely not. You are not the demon, but the Yondaime sealed the fox in your stomach. It is your prisoner, and you are its jailer. You have spent your entire life defending the village. Uruka looked in the traitor's direction. Uzumaki, Naruto and I are very similar. Like you, I was a lonely orphan who began pulling practical jokes to attract attention. He is my favorite student and a wonderful young man, but you are a worthless traitor. Naruto felt more confident after hearing Uruka's sincere remarks. Impatient, Mizuki hurled his freshly washed kunai at the two, scattering them. Well, you two are the same. I'll kill both of you. The traitor then prepared to attack by releasing the giant shuriken that was strapped to his back. Uruka produced a pair of standard-issue kunai and was about to charge at his fellow academy teacher when Uzumaki Naruto blocked his way with an outstretched arm. He's mine, the boy with the whiskers declared, his expression unusually icy. Naruto, you can't possibly. A newcomer said. I do, as he says, as they entered the clearing. Uruka looked at the stranger, a modestly dressed man in a white shirt, black trousers, and sandals. With short cropped white hair and tanned skin with faint tracery scars. The stranger was carrying a simple one-handed sword, its razor edge gleaming in the sunlight. You are who the fuck? And why are all these assholes appearing out of nowhere? Cried a disbelieving Mizuki. I'm San, a retired Konoha Junin, and I'm assisting in the recovery of the seal's forbidden scroll in response to your second query. Karma is a vindictive bitch. Old man, what are you doing here? Naruto inquired. I ran when I smelled blood in the air this strong. The bullshit that bastard was trying to feed you. I heard. You can be sure that if your heart wasn't in the right place, I wouldn't have accepted you as a student. He gave the blonde a flattering look. Butcher him like a pig. Naruto didn't need to be reminded twice. He quickly sped off to face Mizuki after taking a single black knife from his pack. Naruto's unusual weapon choice somewhat turned Uruka off, and she couldn't hide her worried expression. The shinobi with gray hair nearly burst out laughing. Are you people really sending a young child to battle an elite Chunin? I felt like you guys were furious when I cut up the first one. Trust me, San whispered as he put a comforting hand on Uruka's shoulder. This will be beneficial. Even though Naruto had thrashed the Uchiha earlier in the day with a playful, albeit vicious, demeanor, Uruka could tell right away that something had changed with Naruto's demeanor. The blonde was cold, jokeless, and abnormally focused, which was instantly unnerving. In Mizuki, such nuances were lost when Naruto came within range. The gray-haired shinobi struck, aiming to cut the blonde open from left shoulder to right hip with a diagonal swing of his giant shuriken with his right hand as the blonde got closer. Naruto would have none of that. The Jinchuriki barely ducked as the death blow approached, then swung out with a single cut that sent Mizuki's weapon and his right thumb to the ground. It moved north, to a new spot beneath the traitor's elbow, before he could marvel at his new stump. Mizuki let out a scream as Naruto persisted in his assault. His knife slipped between the Chunin's right side ribs, piercing a lung and making it difficult for him to stop screaming. But Mizuki continued then, with such force that Mizuki's back slammed against a tree, The blonde boy sank his blade to the hilt in the traitor's abdomen, and Naruto kneed the bottom of his right fist, transferring the energy of the blow directly into the knife held within and exacerbating the already fatal wound. San's apprentice once more used his right knee, this time pressing it against the back of the blade and the top of his fist, as if that weren't enough. Like a stone, Uzumaki Naruto let his weight fall. Finally escaping Mizuki's battered flesh, the black knife sliced down through his abdomen and past his groin. Naruto's whole bloodthirsty counter had taken only a few seconds, but it was too late for Iruka to recoil. San spoke to Iruka, breaking the stillness in Mizuki's final moments. Return to the Hokage with the Forbidden Scroll of Seals. What comes next will not be something you want to watch. After saying goodbye to San and Naruto, the Chunin, who was looking very pale, picked up the stolen object and headed for the Hokage's tower. San approached and consoled the blonde nin who had been shell-shocked. Naruto, you did well, but there is one last thing you can learn from this dying bastard. The old man drew out his sword, called forth a small knife, and carved a triangular symbol on his right palm with his left hand. Give me your right hand. With a stupid nod, Naruto moved his knife to his left. The same symbol was carved into Naruto's hand by San. Are you aware of the method I employ to treat your training injuries? Yeah, sure. Medic ninjutsu is not what it is. My uncle taught me this technique. It resembles a contract more. Do you recall that in order to become a proficient ninja, my uncle had to find other ways? The little boy remembered everything and nodded. The method is really an evocation of Jashin, an ancient god of violence that they worship up north with the exception of a few tiny, insane, murderous cults. He is currently mostly forgotten, you hear? Stay away from those crazy fucks. Yuha okay, healing is not the goal of the technique. Your enemy is restored by the invocation to Jashin, primarily so that you can carry out even more violent acts against them in addition to being excellent for torture and interrogation. My uncle found that it functions fairly well in training. Only wounds caused by your own hand can be healed using this technique, which only regenerates bodily parts. Additionally, your target must still be alive. Let's move quickly before the pansy fails us. San whispered an old prayer and pressed his right palm to Naruto's. Naruto's palm felt completely cold, but it quickly vanished, leaving his skin untouched. It is impossible to learn or replicate this technique. Only inheritance is possible to invoke it. Say those words again. San pointed contemptuously at Mizuki's trembling body. This worthless shit stain here is a child killer and a traitor to Konoha. Although it involves a lot of chakras, repeat the prayer as often as you feel called to. When the Anbu team finally arrived, they were met with the terrifying sight of a limbless Mizuki crying while being closely watched by a 12-year-old blonde boy and his elderly teacher. At the end of a strange and unsettling day, Iruka conferred with the Hokage. Are you certain that pairing them up is a smart move? It's likely that they will kill one another. On this very rare occasion, Amino Iruka felt compelled to doubt his leader's wisdom. The third Hokage simply grinned back. Returning to Konoha proper, San couldn't help but laugh at his student Uzumaki Naruto's unkempt appearance in spite of the day's tragedies and betrayals. Gosh, in reference to Naruto's blood-stained clothes, the old man said, "Boy, you look more like a butcher's apprentice than a minty fresh genin." Despite an exceptionally long life on the battlefield, San maintained his sanity in part by maintaining an active sense of humor. I'll buy you dinner if you clean up first. You deserve it. The promise of free food rarely failed to cheer up the orphan, and San was rewarded with an enthusiastic shout. After returning home, San gave Naruto the graduation present he had promised, a brand new suit with orange accents, a sophisticated black and orange jacket and pants set that, in spite of its odd coloring, managed to look both professional and a little scary. Gramps, thank you. I'm shocked that you actually did it. Shit, even though I'm not a huge fan of orange, as long as you're capable, it doesn't matter what you wear. San shrugged his shoulders. Naruto tried on his new attire after quickly hopping in the shower. The female store clerk was exactly right, and Naruto still managed to look less like a little kid, even though the colors were more in line with his personality, San had to admit. The blonde tied his new Hite Ite to his head, and Naruto left his pack by the door and was ready to leave to go to dinner. He was positively beaming in his new outfit, which was so cool. He was first stopped by a laughing San. There is one final item. Go ahead and wear your gear in public, the retired ninja said. Can I? Really? An ecstatic Naruto inquired. Yeah, there's no more need to hide now? To complete his outfit, Naruto strapped a sheathed knife to each thigh after reaching inside his pack and removing his two knives. Every detail fit the boy perfectly, and San felt a shiver down his spine. It was as if the old man was watching the creation of a new legend. San shook off the premonition and concentrated on the here and now. "Where are you, boy?" The two of them ended up walking around waiting for inspiration or hunger to strike first. Because Naruto did not immediately choose a place to eat, San suspected that the boy was just looking to show off his new attire, so the old man gave him a little indulgence. "Let the village see the Yondaime's legacy now," the elderly man thought gleefully. San saw that the reactions were all over the place, with some in shock, others in fear, and a smaller group looking at the blonde with a tentative respect. Naruto passed by without paying any attention to the reactions of those around him, his old habit of ignoring the indifference or hostility of the general population of Konoha coming into play. San had heard what had happened at the academy exam from Sarutobi, and he was greatly amused. San knew that the status quo regarding Naruto was changing forever, regardless of how people were responding to the Jinchuriki's new outfit, knives, or Hite, or to rumors of what had happened to the Uchiha or to Mizuki. When two kunoichi, one of whom was unrecognizable in full Anbu gear and the other clearly identifiable in her trademark trenchcoat and fishnets, Mitarashi Anko, strolled up to Naruto, the retired Junin was on the verge of telling the boy to hurry up and pick a restaurant already. "I heard what you did to that bastard Mizuki," the special Junin said, bending forward and speaking into his ear. "I have to say that I agree. I'll see you around." Then, before continuing with her silent companion, she gave his blonde hair a playful tousle. Naruto was too preoccupied with blushing from the attention to object to what she was doing. San laughed at his student's response, noting that Naruto was still somewhat of a child in spite of what he had learned. What the devil was that, old man? Boy, don't ask me. I've been married, but I still don't get women. It's much simpler to kill an enemy. Hell, it's even simpler to kill a large number of enemies at once. Naruto gazed incredulously at his teacher. "You have a wife? Hold on a second. Had, as in past tense, a lifetime ago?" asked San to clarify. Naruto halted abruptly. Sorry for bringing it up, Gramps," a pitiful blonde muttered. "No need to apologize. We simply didn't have enough time together, but we had a nice run." San made the decision to make things right after noticing that the atmosphere had become a little gloomy. "I'll share a humorous story with you. Do you recall the prayer I taught you to say to Jashin earlier today?" "Yes, I do. How about it?" the boy, feeling a little curious, asked. The older nin winked and said, "I wouldn't have met my future wife if it weren't for that damned thing." "How on earth did that occur?" the young blonde questioned aloud. "During the Great Shinobi Wars, she worked as a baker and was just an ordinary civilian. An enemy nin attempted to use Konohagakure as a human shield against me. When war had managed to break out right outside her door, I stuck because she was going to die anyhow. I cured her and killed him. We met that way." Naruto Uzumaki blew a low whistle of gratitude. "Wow, old man, even your romantic stories have blood and guts in them." San laughed at his pupil's insightful remark. "Violence can occasionally result in some really fascinating courtships. If you're lucky, you might be able to store your purple-headed kanai in the fleshy equipment pouch of a drunken kunoichi. One day, before you know it, your kids will be enrolled in a shinobi academy, and she may wake up and attempt to murder you. That's how life is funny." Nara Shikaku sneezed violently at that precise moment, spitting out his sake cup and yelling obscenities. San used the occasion to call a very old and very worn picture frame to his right hand, which held a faded and wrinkled picture of a happy, young red-headed woman. San said, "Here," giving Naruto a glimpse into his past. "She's really, really pretty, Gramps," Naruto cried. "Yeah, she was a fuck. All this reminiscing is making me thirsty." San indicated a bar in the area that served only shinobi. "Boy, what about a liquid dinner?" Naruto was greeted with contempt the moment he walked through the bar's doors. Wobbling toward the two, a bleary-eyed Chunin yelled, "What the fuck do you want here, demon Br? A long line of shining steel held by an angry old man abruptly cut off the drunk nin's remarks. The white-haired nin snarled, "I advise you to hold your tongue, cocksucker, lest you find it carved out of your mouth." Since it was well known that being a pushover does not make one a legitimately mean old man in a shinobi village, the majority of the bar patrons did not recognize San but instead gave both newcomers a wide berth and much more respect. Following the brief etiquette lesson, which was interrupted by the previously mentioned Shunin running out of the bar in soiled pants, San got himself and Naruto a large portion of takoyaki and some sake. "Naruto, now that you've started to use my teachings for real, it's time to deal with some of the limitations of what you've been taught." "Old man, what do you mean by limitations?" Surprised, the boy with the whiskers asked. "Knife, sword, or even chakra strikes aren't always enough to kill everything. Some adversaries are more difficult to defeat. I saw you move. Gramps, can you think of one adversary that you couldn't use to mop the floor? Joking, Naruto. The Kyuubi, San said gravely in response. All of the knowledge you have gained thus far is fundamental. It will protect you and eliminate 99.9% of your adversaries, but a select few will challenge everything you know and more. So, old man, how did you handle the nine-tailed fox? For a while, there was a standstill. My attacks weren't hurting it, and it was unable to land any of its strikes. I would have eventually faltered and died if the Kyuubi had kept its attention on me, but it got tired of our game. It totally disregarded me in favor of targets that were less adept at dodging. Half that day, I watched helplessly as many of my comrades perished. San saw the taint of self-loathing on his student, and Naruto looked down at his little sake cup, ashamed of what was sealed into him. Dude, you are not at all to blame. We would all have passed away years ago if it weren't for you. This village ought to have viewed you as a hero. The teacher and student were silent for a considerable amount of time. Naruto finally broke the silence and said, "Thanks, I really mean it," feeling much better. San smiled brightly back at the sentiment. I bring up my own failure to demonstrate to you that the style you are currently familiar with is designed to kill regular men, not demons or other inhuman creatures. In addition to continuous improvement, you'll need a few trump cards to use against the inhumanly tough jerks you'll surely encounter. Am I going to learn some nefarious, ostentatious jutsus here? The eager Jinchuriki asked. No, let's be completely clear on this. I won't treat you like a red-eyed bastard and give you some jutsus. Rather, I want to make you a much more formidable shinobi than I was, but one who carries a lot of aces. San's smile hinted at ominous things to come. Are you game? San allowed Uzumaki Naruto to have a lot of firsts. Among the more memorable moments of Naruto's training with the elderly man were his first disemboweling, his first recollection of sparring with a collapsed lung, and his first experience of being stabbed in the eyes and shedding blood. Naruto was going through yet another first. He was supposed to learn his team assignments today, but instead he was dealing with his first hangover. It was beautiful by the standards of its kind. It was awful by the young blonde's standards. The hangover lingered and ached with no end in sight, whereas Naruto's knife wounds were excruciatingly painful but healed rather quickly. Head thumping like a kettle drum, Naruto drank a liter of tap water to quench his thirst and headed to the academy, red-eyed and agitated. Naruto made a big impression as he entered the sparsely populated classroom with his knives, his new black and orange outfit, and a graduation present from San. The blonde boy was a hot topic among his peers because of his behavior the day before as well. Yamanaka Ino approached the boy with the intention of criticizing him for how he had treated Uchiha Sasuke during the final exam. She wisely clamped up instantly after Naruto gave her such a scathingly contemptuous glare. Maybe the latent psychic abilities in her family had foreseen a serious ass-kicking in her near future. Even so, she left feeling frightened but unharmed. The pink-haired Haruno Sakura was not as easily intimidated as the blonde girl, and she went to scold the blonde for publicly embarrassing her crush. He twitched his fingers nervously toward holstered knives, but she ignored his bloodshot eyes. She uttered a virtuous tirade in an attempt to win over the person she was in love with. Uzumaki Naruto would have stood there and accepted his lumps amicably on any other day. At one point, Naruto had a serious crush on the industrious girl, but his training with San had made him incredibly intolerant of bullshit. Naruto discovered over the course of the last year that it was the ultimate form of bullshit to be treated like trash by someone you liked. The young genin still harbored a slight affection for the Haruno girl, though. Nobody likes you, Naruto. You can't compare to Sasuke. You don't even have a claw. The fact that Uzumaki Naruto was not a happy person in the morning was made even worse by the Haruno girl's insults and a bad hangover. Naruto Uzumaki was not going to be kind today. Haruno Sakura was cut off in the middle of a word, not just a sentence. She was completely unprepared for Naruto's smoothness. Even in a relaxed manner, a finger flicked her hard in the throat. She recoiled from him and gagged. Sakura coughed painfully and with tears in her eyes after he savagely flicked her throat when she was well enough to attempt a single protest. He had already walked past her, blissfully ignoring her as he made his way to his seat as if she didn't matter, but she was able to gather herself and attempt to glare at him. It nearly hurt Sakura's pride more than her throat. Uzumaki Naruto was obviously in a unique mood today and not to be messed with. Unfortunately, that memo did not reach his soon-to-be Junin sensei. For the first and most likely the last time, Hatake Kakashi traveled to meet his new genin team. He and the other Junin teachers had previously received some preliminary reports regarding the aptitudes of their potential pupils. The reports that were provided to Kakashi were dreadfully outdated, as is frequently the case with documentation. The Junin, who was more interested in the contents of his favorite book series than in the most recent Konoha rumors, was completely unaware of the events that took place the other day. He was anticipating a bookworm, a class clown with questionable skills, and a Uchiha headcase, the one-eyed nin, also anticipated failing them with ease. Expectations can kill, as any seasoned ninja including Kakashi himself would attest. The seasoned Junin would have double and even triple checked his information sources if this had been any sort of mission outside the village, but the pressure of failing another genin team dulled his normally keen senses. Kakashi was more than 2 hours late for his team's meeting. The classroom door was slightly ajar when the Junin pushed it open, barely avoiding a brick that was balancing between the door and doorframe. Kakashi turned to face his students. A glum Uchiha, a kunoichi with pink hair, and a blonde who was deeply disappointed. They appeared angry and hungry somehow. The weary blonde looked especially irate. With tact, Kakashi said, "I think I hate you all already." Kakashi's ego was stimulated by the near miss with the brick tomorrow. He intended to test them and give them another chance to be genin, but he changed his mind. Now he would put them to the test and be done with it. The masked ninja said, "Meet me on the roof," and then disappeared. The rest of Team 7 followed Kakashi more slowly due to hunger and inexperience, but they still showed up as scheduled. After they were all back together on the roof, Kakashi proposed a necessary icebreaker. "How about we go around in a circle and share some information about ourselves, like your name, likes, dislikes, and your goals for the future? You first." The pink-haired girl was indicated by the senior shinobi. "What about yourself, sensei? Shouldn't you go first?" The only female member of Team 7 interrupted. The Junin gave a thoughtless shrug. "Whatever my name is, Hitaki Kakashi. My likes and dislikes are classified and I don't have a dream for the future." The uninformative introduction caused the three genin to blink in surprise. Then, pointing to Sasuke, the Junin hoped the dark-haired boy would just go ahead and do it without question. "Uchiha Sasuke, I don't really have a dream, but an ambition to one day revive my clan and to kill a certain man." "Figures," Kakashi thought, gesturing to the girl. She rambled, "I'm Haruno Sakura, what I like here," before turning to face the Uchiha. Sakura frowned and glared at Naruto, who merely flicked a finger in her direction, making her flinch uncontrollably. "What I dislike," she said. "My dream is Toa." She blushed as she looked shyly back at Sasuke. Kakashi suppressed a sigh. The girl would be fortunate to be killed in action right away rather than being taken prisoner and subjected to torture. Given how fixated she was on the last Uchiha remaining in Konohagakure, if she failed right away, that would be ideal. She would be broken by the mental and physical preparation required. The blonde was then signaled to begin by the Junin. When Naruto said, "My name is Uzumaki Naruto, I like ramen and training, what I dislike," he took a moment to reflect. He thought about everything San had taught him. "I hate people who take things for granted. My dream is to become the best Hokage ever." Interesting, Kakashi thought. "Alright then, meet me at training ground 14 in 10 minutes. The older ninja then disappeared once more. Hitaki Kakashi considered his initial thoughts about his group. They would fail, and fail terribly, unless they managed to pull something spectacular out of the bag. In any case, they wouldn't be solely to blame. The practical skills and values required to succeed on the battlefield were stunted by Konoha's relative prosperity and altruistic disposition. As a genin who grew up during a war, Kakashi was aware of how drastically things had changed. In favor of the popularized idea of ninjas, academy students frequently overlooked the practical values of teamwork and rigorous training because his potential students were so preoccupied with themselves and ostentatious jutsus. Kakashi largely failed them. The Junin's prior experience as an Anbu commander had taught him that dealing with these ninjas was difficult and frequently detrimental to missions. The three genin reached the training area. Kakashi observed a hint of anxiety and excitement as he gazed at the recent academy graduates. "You have one more test to complete before you officially become genin. The failure rate of this test is 66. If you fail, you get sent back to the academy." A displeased Naruto bluntly expressed his teammates' annoyance by exclaiming, "What the hell? Aren't we genin already?" Kakashi let out a loud sigh. The academy exams only test for those with the potential to become genin. Of the 27 academy graduates, only about 9 will become genin. This is the final cut. From the equipment pouch on his hip, the Junin extracted 2 tiny bells. "The test is simple. Whoever gets a bell from me graduates, but there are 2 bells and 3 of you at best. One of you will still fail and get sent back to the academy." Haruno Sakura questioned anxiously, "We're genin, how are we supposed to face down a Junin?" Glancing through his mask, Kakashi grinned. "That's not my problem. I only have one bit of advice for you all. Come at me with everything you've got. Jutsus, weapons, dirty tricks, or whatever you'll need, every last bit." Naruto asked, almost trembling with anticipation, "Are you fucking serious?" Kakashi calmly said, "Come at me with intent to kill, otherwise you'll fail. Prepare yourselves." mistaking the blonde's disbelief for fear. Kakashi then took a few steps backwards in the direction of his new squad. Begin. In order to find cover and develop their own sound tactical plans, Haruno Sakura and Uchiha Sasuke immediately ran off in opposite directions. It would be absolutely suicidal for a genin to attempt a straight fight with a Junin, they knew deep down. Unbelieving in his luck, Naruto simply refused to back down. The Junin even had the audacity to pull out a little orange book and begin reading, seemingly unsurprised that Naruto did not hide without even glancing at the blonde. The grown man was giggling girlishly. The young boy with the whiskers was aware that he was most likely outclassed and outgunned. Being a Junin, his opponent likely possessed greater strength, speed, reach, experience, and jutsus than he did. The odds were terribly stacked against him on paper. San had been teaching him to perform well under similar circumstances. In his heart, Naruto knew that the Junin was not as accurate as he was, nor was he as violent or deadly as the elderly man. This Kakashi asshole would be easy compared to the old man. Pulling a knife from its sheath, Naruto approached the Junin with composure. It was time to serve his team leader a taste of what was to be served. A particularly juicy passage from his favorite book series was just getting started, and Hitaki Kakashi was enjoying it. The older, more seasoned dark-haired Yukie was about to console the vivacious pig-tailed blonde Naruto. Scenes like these elevated sexy girl-on-girl action to an art form for the one-eyed Junin. Enjoying one of his favorite activities, he waited languidly for the telltale warning signs of an awkward genin approaching. Kakashi's introspective thoughts on art were rudely cut off. Through the palm of his left hand, whose fingers held the Icha volume, the black blade of a knife materialized as if by magic. The stab was incredibly accurate, barely jarring the bones as it slid between the metacarpals, but Uzumaki Naruto then twisted and tore his knife free from between Kakashi's middle and index fingers. Naruto's harsh training had taught him when to be rough and mean and when to be precise, like a surgeon using a scalpel. Sans training with the young Jinchuriki was now paying off for Kakashi. The injured left hand was the one he used most to enjoy the Icha experience in private, and the Junin nearly started crying. However, the older nin was currently preoccupied with more pressing issues. The Junin was unable to use the majority of his powerful jutsu library because his left hand was completely useless. Kakashi quickly covered his ripped left hand with a bandage. He needed to think of something, anything. Naruto gave a spooky smile. Just like San, Kakashi was in a panic because he had made a very poor assessment of the situation. The blonde was practically playing with him now. The boy occasionally disrupted the Junin's perception of safety and distance by channeling a precise amount of chakra through his knives. The blonde's whims caused the blades to lengthen or shorten. It was the same kind of manipulation of nature that Sarutobi Asuma could do with his trench knives. It was unsettling to think of a novice genin being capable of such manipulation. Things were made worse by the boy's sparing use of the technique. Feeling foolish, Kakashi frantically backpedaled in an attempt to avoid blows that might not have existed at all. Kakashi raised his Hite Ite and revealed his lone Sharingan eye, growing more and more bloodied and desperate. The Sharingan eye was fully developed and could predict the most likely future movements of an adversary. It was best described as a sophisticated form of educated guessing, though some called it a limited form of precognition. The Uchihas were then very good at reading an opponent's movements at the beginning of an attack and then correctly predicting what would happen at the very end, if one were to compare it to a story in a book. San would laugh and call it complete bullshit if you brought up that observation. He may even say something like, "That's nice in theory and all, but I'm not going to rely on a single strike, or two, or three, or a dozen. I'm going to kill you regardless of how you move or how good you can guess." Fundamentally, San and Naruto were ruthlessly opportunistic in their killing techniques. In the end, it made no difference if their opponent moved, if they didn't, or if they attempted to counter or avoid. Their approach was not focused on using flawless textbook methods. The goal was to kill without being touched in return. Kakashi recognized his error and fixed his lone red eye on the boy with the whiskers. The Junin saw dozens of paths the genin would take. Rather than just one, his vision was filled with 100 phantom Uzumaki Narutos, inflicting various wounds on him. Compared to an overt sense of raw killing intent, it was a very different feeling. At any rate, Hitaki Kakashi had plenty of experience with that. As though the boy secretly harbored a vast unrealized potential for extreme violence, this was something else, something hideous and foreign. Without saying a word, Naruto withdrew a few folded explosive tags. The genin swiftly fastened 3 pieces to the handles of each of his knives, causing Kakashi to wince. Kakashi realized that adding more explosives to those knives was a sinister strategy. Each explosion's blast radius would increase significantly, and the knives would be transformed into lethal shrapnel fragments. At the first hint that the blonde would drop his knives, Kakashi readied himself to employ the Shushin technique. He didn't holding onto his knives. Naruto drew closer, avoiding the injured Junin's frantic counterattacks, frequently by a narrow margin. Before sensing a slight jolt of chakra in the air, Kakashi saw Naruto's grin widen. Hitaki Kakashi's world went dark when the blonde boy exploded. Naruto felt as though he had heeded Sans advice the other day as he watched the explosion destroy his cage Bunshin and knock out the Junin in terms of force. The old man informed Naruto that a hammer was needed for some tasks and a scalpel for others. It was something extremely explosive in this instance. Uchiha Sasuke and Haruno Sakura dashed into the clearing created by the enormous explosion. What happened? The astonished girl inquired. Naruto shrugged and grinned. I cheated with the help of half a dozen explosive tags. The two other genin simply gaped. According to Uchiha Sasuke, gaping was a small mouth opening that had nothing to do with a grimace or frown. It was a strange sight. In memory, Naruto snapped his fingers. Oh yeah, before I forget, consider this a peace offering. The blonde threw a bell to each of them. The gesture even took Sasuke by surprise. The dark-haired boy asked, his rage fading, why? It's simple. If we're going to depend on each other as a team, we could at least try to get along. Sakura asked, how about a bell for yourself? The blonde let out a loud laugh. I have something much better in mind. Hitaki Kakashi was severely burned when he eventually regained consciousness, but his other wounds, including the tear in his left hand, miraculously disappeared. Looking around, the one-eyed Junin saw the three genin keeping watch over him. Uchiha Sasuke and Haruno Sakura were both holding bells. Uzumaki Naruto asked in confusion, so, do we pass? Kakashi's orange Icha Icha volume, which had an explosive tag tucked into it like a bookmark, was in the blonde's hands. Kakashi could only give a stupid nod. Sitting in the Hokage's office, Amino Iruka reviewed some last-minute matters pertaining to the academic school year's conclusion. Paperwork, and more paperwork, but the good-natured old Hokage was a pleasant companion. Iruka sighed to himself, anticipating a predictable afternoon. The sound of approaching footsteps outside became more and more audible. Silently, both men watched as a rumpled and charred Hitaki Kakashi threw open the doors of the Hokage's office. The elderly man said, hello Kakashi, how are you finding your new team? With his brightest grandfatherly grin. It was obvious that the seasoned Junin was not feeling very happy. With all due respect Hokage-sama, but just what the hell has Uzumaki Naruto been learning? If he had only been 60 or so years younger, the village hidden in the leaves leader's utterly innocent, who, me? Expression might have been acceptable. Kakashi remained unfazed. The renowned tactician then immediately assumed a contemplative stance, massaging his aging chin, after realizing that his initial strategy had failed. I seem to recall that young Naruto has been training in the mornings with a retired shinobi. Through gritted teeth, the Junin asked almost casually, which retired shinobi, Hokage-sama? The Hokage grinned. You might be familiar with him from his role as the executioner during the Great Shinobi Wars, but I doubt you would know him by name. Unable to understand the reference, Amino Iruka simply blinked in perplexity. Hitaki Kakashi simply froze, feeling sick to his stomach and his face turning pale beneath his mask. The person who carries out the execution. Kakashi tried really hard not to shiver. In the official history of Konohagakure, some names and actions were never and will never be glorified. No historian will wax poetic about how Nara Skikaku unintentionally killed a child by strangling him with his shadow to prevent jeopardizing an A-rank assassination mission, or how Morino Ibiki had to drive bamboo spikes under a traitor's fingernails to get them to speak. The pure truth was only known to a select few Anbu members and other Konoha hierarchy members. Before the modern organization of Anbu, Konohagakure relied on individual shinobi for Black Ops missions, where a single capable nin was given the work of what entire Anbu teams were given nowadays. Although Konoha was known for being soft-hearted, it was once another small pissant village. The Leaf Village's reputation as a major shinobi power was built upon the blood of its enemies and patriots. These proto-Anbu made up for their relatively small numbers with skill and ferocity. One dominant figure was referred to in whispered tones with the utmost respect as the meanest motherfucker of all. In every reference Kakashi heard about this elite group. The person who carries out the execution. Unusually upset, Hitaki Kakashi pointed the finger accusingly at his village chief, saying, you are a bad man. Then, pointing to Amino Iruka, the one-eyed nin said, and you're the friend of a bad man. Iruka simply watched in confusion as the Junin hurried away. The Sandaime was civil enough not to laugh. Hokage-sama, does that imply that Team 7 passes? The Sandaime's laughter was interpreted by Amino Iruka as a yes. Hitaki Kakashi thought back on his first encounter with Team 7, as well as each cut and bruise. It was his encounter to win or lose, and as a pragmatic, Kakashi knew that he was solely to blame. Had he taken them seriously from the start, things might have gone much more smoothly. If Uchiha Obito could see him now, he would have had a field day after being blindsided by a genin who was officially dead last at the academy. For Obito, it would have been an absolute dream come true. The lone survivor of Team Minato now had to contend with a genin team of his own due to his own conceit and ignorance. Fuck, he had never wanted to relive the agonies of his past, but they had earned it. He would be damned if they became the same as his previous team, but they were his now. Similar to Obito, who gave his life to protect a fellow soldier. Like Minato-sensei, he sacrificed his soul in order to vanquish the demon known as the Nine-Tailed Fox. Like Rin, who was taken prisoner by a group of Iwa Nin, tortured, sexually assaulted, and killed. Kakashi was a consummate professional who always got the job done, but the loss of his team, his surrogate family, jaded him so much that he withdrew inwardly, carrying out his missions effectively, doing little else. For that, he was appointed an Anbu commander. Kakashi found it easier to be a part of Konoha's Anbu forces than to have a team, even though the missions were more difficult. He was met with admiration and respect instead of love, and the ninjas he worked with, who obviously understood the life or death nature of their profession, were comrades rather than friends. His family was Team Minato. Kakashi secretly hoped that he would never be in charge of a genin team, which was why his graduation exams were so difficult in comparison to other Junin. The same reason he liked Jiraiya's writings better than his peers' company, because they told simple stories. Jiraiya's stories typically had happy endings or, at worst, bittersweet ones. The Icha Icha series' happy endings were not like that in real life. Every real story ended in death with Obito's eye at his disposal and the newly dubbed Reikiri, which he had just used to pierce through an expert Raiden user and his prized lightning bolt jutsu. Kakashi discovered that out years ago when he was powerless to stop Rin's torment after discovering Rin's cooling body. He had mowed down every member of the IWA Nin squad responsible. Kakashi made the decision that Team 7 would not become like Team Minato, and even if they did hate him for it, they would all succeed as shinobi together. Kakashi would carry out his duties as usual, but he had many legacies to preserve. It was time to clean up before dealing with a critical matter involving his new genin team. Like a chain, a team was only as strong as its weakest link. Before going to bed, Haruno Sakura combed her hair in front of the mirror in her bedroom. A tall, silver-haired figure in dark Anbu-style armor suddenly materialized behind her, his full equipment pouches full of kunai and shuriken, and the hilt of a short sword protruding from behind his back. The girl with the pink hair gave a high-pitched cry of fear. "Yo!" The Junin with the silver hair waved. "Oh no! Kakashi-sensei, what are you doing in my room? I had a wake-up call earlier today. As you saw, I am now accountable for your life and potential demise as a result." Perplexed and not at all intimidated, Haruno Sakura nodded. "Being a shinobi is not something kids can do for fun. I will train you until you despise me, until you are proficient, and hopefully until you are able to compete with your teammates. You can't afford anything less as an active-duty kunoichi in a potential heavy assault team, so I'll be expecting the best from you. You will be killed immediately in battle if you take your new role and responsibilities lightly. At worst, you will be captured alive and subjected to torture that most male shinobi will never endure." The idea made Sakura tremble with disgust. Kakashi threw her a little package. "What is this?" the young girl questioned aloud through his face mask. The Junin grinned. "Mercy capsules are what those are. Biting down on one will kill you quickly and painlessly, but swallowing one whole will pass through your system on missions. Some nin keep them in their mouths to prevent being caught alive in an emergency. You could also shatter the capsules and use the same poison to harm your adversaries." Kakashi suddenly became deadly serious. To avoid a fate worse than death, either take your training seriously or get used to the thought of biting down on a capsule. Okay. Sakura just nodded. Numb and terrified, Kakashi played fully tousled her hair. "I'll teach you guys the ropes because I was an Anbu commander once. I hope it never comes to that, so I'll pay close attention to you in particular." The Junin departed with a tiny wave. Sakura gazed at the tiny bundle she was holding in disbelief. What sort of team did she wind up on, where a Junin sensei kindly gives his subordinates suicide pills? It was difficult for Uzumaki Naruto to fall asleep. In actuality, it was agonizing. Hours had passed, but it might as well have been days or weeks as unseen shadows fell upon him while he slept, sometimes brandishing a variety of weapons, sometimes using vicious tactics, and sometimes attacking him individually or collectively with ruthless cooperation. The only constants were that they were extremely skilled and relentless, and they always prevailed in the end. It didn't matter how well he hit or dodged, he would eventually falter and be killed in return. Regardless of how many he killed, Naruto was repeatedly whole, plagued by enigmatic enemies, and impaled, burned, and gasping for air. With every defeat and against ever doomier odds, Naruto's frantic instinct for survival intensified, and he felt an irrational urge to rage against fate with every dying breath whenever the shadows overcame him. Naruto Uzumaki would not be broken, even if his fate was a cruel death. He would fight to the death, even if it was ultimately in vain. After what felt like an eternity, Naruto woke up, sprawled on San's couch, exhausted and drenched in sweat. The old man merely gave San a knowing smile and nodded in agreement as he described his dream in vivid detail. Sometimes an art chooses its practitioner, and other times a person chooses an art. Naruto, the latter is what your dream implies, boy. Do you know what this means? Naruto gave a headshake. A knife appeared in San's right hand. This is what you were born for, it runs in your family. San threw away the knife and faced his blonde pupil. Let's go, the Sandame owes me a favor, and it's time to cash and I promise he'll adore it. Uchiha Sasuke was facing a difficult situation. Uzumaki Naruto made his balls hurt. It had nothing to do with any underlying affection between orphans, no. They genuinely hurt because the blue-eyed, blonde-haired devil had the audacity to stomp on them with delight, as though he were trying to make a fine wine out of the pulpy remnants of the last Uchiha's junk. Sasuke was subjected to the one-sided battle akin to a public execution rather than a final academy exam. In just a few seconds, the whiskered boy unintentionally put Sasuke's plans to repopulate his clan and kill his older brother in jeopardy by stomping his groin and jabbing his eye. He regained a painful but manageable level of mobility following numerous ice pack applications and one botched attempt to apply an analgesic bomb to the injured area. However, Uzumaki Naruto once again made things more difficult just when things had begun to return to something approaching normal somehow. The incredibly talented blonde defeated a Junin by herself. Even worse, Sasuke was unsure of how Naruto managed to pull off such a feat. Everything happened so fast, and there was a huge explosion at the end. Sasuke's ego and pride prevented him from asking the blonde directly how he did it. Uzumaki Naruto's secrets would eventually be revealed to Sasuke, but for now, he had more important matters to attend to. His wounds were still very sore, similar to how a mother bird tends to her young. He would heal his injured groin before attempting to outdo Naruto by any means necessary. The Sandame were occasionally relieved to have someone like San in their midst. Sometimes it was wonderful to have a comrade who was alive, remembered Konoha's past, and was as good at reminiscing as he was. That was not the case here. Are you fucking serious? Hearing the typically polite and dignified man curse aloud for the first time, Uzumaki Naruto gaped at his Hokage. San repeated his request calmly. I want you to teach the boy the very first kinjutsu you ever invented, the S-rank one, not that pansy-ass a rank. You could die from chakra exhaustion, bullshit, but the very same technique that laid you out for weeks. It was obvious that the Sandame was upset. You do know that if I tried to do that technique as I am right now, it could very well kill me, not to mention of what it would do to our young Naruto here. San responded, raising his hands in the air as though addressing a young child who was incapable of understanding his reasoning. I'm not asking you to actually do the technique, just teach the boy how to do it. Naturally, Uzumaki Naruto became alarmed when the lethality of the mystery jutsu to its user was mentioned. Undeterred, San went on with his reasoning. It's perfect for the boy, he already knows the Kage Bunshin, and has the necessary chakra reserves, and his chakra control is getting much better. But it's the most painful technique I have ever had the misfortune to come across. It's not even that powerful. Even now, I can close my eyes and still feel my skin blistering and lungs scorching. Why would you seek to inflict such an atrocity on Naruto? The Hokage begged with his hands on his hips. The blonde boy finally chirped, yeah, why? San sighed as he glanced at the two individuals in front of him. One was his closest friend, and the other was his closest relative to a grandson. It's actually pretty simple. Genjutsu is one of the areas that I have never really trained you in, Naruto. It's not my forte. Most genjutsus are easy to dispel, and I've shown you how to do so, but the most lethal illusions you will come across will trick the mind into killing the body. They cause a person to give up, because a victim of high-level genjutsu is subjected to unfathomable pain. If you learn this technique, you'll learn the type of pain that can't be matched by anyone's overactive imagination. San gave a shrug. The fact that this technique can be used offensively is just an added bonus. Knowing that San planned to use his kinjutsu for endurance training made the Sandame feel more than a little queasy. The Hokage felt compelled to explain the technique in detail to Uzumaki Naruto. Decades ago, when the usage of suicidal jutsu was fairly common, I tried to adapt one that converts a healthy ninja into a living, breathing, flaming time bomb into a less than lethal technique. I had the brilliant idea to create a reinforced clone that would use the devastating jutsu, leaving the user unharmed. Do you know what happens when you dispel a cage bunshin, Naruto? After giving it some thought, the young boy with the whiskers said, don't you get information and memories from it? Right, but what I did not know was that the more potent you make a clone, the closer your connection to it. When my clone detonated, I received not only its memories, but its exact physical sensations and state of mind. I felt as if I had sacrificed my life and my dreams for one suicidal attack. I was the one who burned inside and out. The phantom sensations of pain you feel with this technique can't be dulled by anything except time. Do you really want to experience that? Naruto pondered his options for a few seconds before posing the one question that kept bothering him. Exactly how big of an explosion are talking about here? Naruto smiled. It made the Sandaime tremble. Amused by his copyright question, San nodded. Naruto, could you step outside, and give San and I a few moments to speak alone? The Hokage asked, looking at San and then at the blonde genin in shock. With a shrug, the boy from Uzumaki walked out of the room. When he did, the professor instantly cast a flickering barrier enclosing both men with a brief series of hand seals. Just what the hell are you getting at, San? Why this desperate kind of training? San grinned as though he were telling a joke. Blood runs true. Sarutobi, do you know of the boy's ultimate ambition to become Hokage? He hasn't concealed it, the elderly man said, nodding. In a few years, could you think of a better successor than Naruto? The Sandaime gave a headshake. Many people in Konoha would be gravely upset and target Naruto for outright assassination if they found me favoring him, people like Danzo. Fuck Danzo. Remember when Minato secured his nomination as Yondaime Hokage? That memory made both men laugh. The young blonde had offered to challenge everyone who had opposed his nomination at once, demonstrating the level of skill expected of a Hokage candidate. To confront them, he led all of the objectors, including the notorious Nin Orochimaru, to a training field. The blonde Junin challenged everyone to approach him freely with the intention of killing, holding up a fat, uncapped red marker to represent a real kunai. Namikaze Minato neglected to mention somewhere along the line that he had previously planted a large number of Hiraishin tags throughout the training area. All of the objectors' throats, hearts, and other vital areas were suddenly covered in red lines and dots. In the future, Naruto will be able to do the same kind of thing but with a real kunai and without all the fancy jutsu slinging. As if to snort, the Hokage said, it's amazing the lengths you'll go to leave a legacy in Konoha. San grinned. Don't get me wrong, but I have the strange feeling that even without my interference, Naruto's the type of person who would become Hokage through sheer determination and grit. You don't know that boy like I do. The Sandaime nodded as he thought about Konoha's future, which extended well beyond his own life. Ultimately, the Hokage gave in and consented to teach Naruto beginning the following week. After completing their goal, San and Naruto had breakfast and left to train. Uchiha Sasuke had recently struck it lucky he had somehow happened upon Naruto training with an elderly man. In fact, it was a little discouraging. No gouts of fire, no crackling electricity, no ostentatious methods. Naruto only avoided the old man's sword swings at a leisurely pace. To be honest, it became rather dull to watch after a while. No illusions, no explosions, no clones. In fact, Sasuke yawned. The elderly man stopped moving and spoke out loud. You might as well come out of hiding now. I know you've been watching for a while. If you're that bored, I can always carve your eyes out of your skull and replace them with your testicles for trying to steal my techniques. Sasuke left his hiding place instantly. San faced his pupil. Can you vouch for this asshole? That's one of my new teammates, Uchiha Sasuke. He's alright, but he's kind of a dick, laughed Naruto. That makes sense. All the Uchiha men I've known were either arrogant bastards or psychos, or a vicious mix of the two. Sasuke became enraged at the old man's remarks. The women I'll miss. I never partook because I was a married man, but the stories I could tell you of the dark-haired beauty Uchiha Makoto and her magic fingers, or the talents of her cousins, those gals inspired volumes of literature. San gave the newcomer an odd look. Hey boy, I thought only your eyes were supposed to turn red, not your whole face. Uchiha Sasuke, a mama's boy, hurried toward San and yelled, I'll kill you. He's obviously delusional. I'm guessing he's more like a crazy type Uchiha then, San said, turning to face Naruto. Sasuke began to form hand seals and barraged forward. San calmly took his sword out of its sheath. Naruto snorted and bided his time until the slaughter began. The majority of elemental shinobi saw the use of edged weapons as purely practical. The most basic and efficient methods of using a blade to kill were typically taught to the average ninja. What purpose would it serve to learn about different nuances, like the cultural and historical background of a particular weapon art? The 7 swordsmen of the village hidden in the mist were among the many shinobi who adhered to this generally recognized pattern for a ninja like Hoshigaki Kisame, who is taller than most men and wields a semi-sentient chakra-devouring sword. Subtlety is ultimately useless. Konohagakure's San was not like other ninjas. The elderly man was aware that the majority of ninjas were only interested in short-term gains in combat efficiency and had little interest in anything much more complex. Because of this, there were never many medic nin, and even fewer people who practiced fuinjutsu. This was also the reason why San, with all his eloquence and worldly wisdom, frequently called the majority of ninjas stupid fucking idiots. It wasn't that good ninjas weren't produced by training only the most basic and efficient techniques. Yes, it did. Unfortunately, over time, a person's development was often hampered by this narrow-minded focus. San had no interest in merely being effective on the battlefield. He already had a fearsome and effortless efficiency that came from decades of field experience. No, complete mastery of edged weapons was what San was after. This required San to become an expert in a number of subtleties. For this reason, it was essential to instruct Uzumaki Naruto on the history of the fighting art they both practiced and its rationale. With enough practice, even a fool could mimic a movement. San didn't see any skill in it. He was aware that mastery involved much more than just memorizing a set of moves. Understanding the mindset of the art one practiced was more important than simply knowing the movements. The essence of an art was more important to comprehend than its fundamental mechanics. It is impossible to improvise, develop, and eventually master an art if one only concentrates on the fundamental mechanics. The fundamental mechanics of a shinobi's extrapolations and improvisations would typically be equally or even more effective than what they were taught if they were acutely aware of the spirit of their craft. You had to improvise in combat. San had seen firsthand that access to a weapon of such outrageous power as the renowned swords of the 7 swordsmen of Kirigakure or the Nidaim's Reijin was not always fortunate. You would frequently have to get by on the field without even the most basic supplies. A ninja needed to be skilled enough to use any weapon and any advantage against a sea of disadvantages. When San had run out of kunai and had only one sword left, it was one of his most memorable moments of improvisation on the battlefield. He had used a child's abandoned paper airplane, strengthened and weighed down with chakra, as a lethal projectile to save the life of a wounded comrade, and because he was too far away to confront the enemy directly, a rapidly approaching whistling sound momentarily distracted the enemy nin, and then the top half of his skull was as quickly separated from the bottom half. As San watched Uchiha Sasuke charge at him, chakra blazing, he concluded that the irate young man had no idea what subtlety was. The old man wanted to share because he felt generous. Uzumaki Naruto occasionally detested the 3 minutes it took to make instant ramen. That was the case here. San would have given Sasuke a cold dose of reality by the time a bowl of instant ramen was ready to eat, putting an end to his little outburst. He might miss something as easy as taking out a thermos and soaking some dry noodles in hot water. Naruto had no intention of losing the chance to witness San's actions in action. The young blonde boy had never grown weary of watching San wielding a sword, even though he witnessed the old man's prowess every day. It was difficult to put into words, but it felt completely different from when San experimented with knives. When Naruto once attempted to express his observation to San, the elderly man laughed. The old man was amused by an inside joke that Naruto did not yet understand, not by the kind of humor that implied he was enjoying himself at the expense of his student. He clarified, "Boy, playing with knives is a game for young men. It's all mobility and viciousness. Swords are perfect for an old bastard like myself, so I can be lazy as well as vicious at my advanced age." That made them both laugh. Naruto believed that San brandishing a sword was anything but slothful. It would be aptly described as perfect. The elderly man only made the necessary movements. He had the option to turn around and throw fire everywhere, but he didn't have to. While San was vicious and nasty when wielding a knife, he was equally deadly when brandishing a sword and exuded poise and composure. Having to deal with it was incredibly annoying. Despite his seemingly straightforward movements, his timing and distance were flawless. Naruto was aware that any gaps in the elderly man's defenses were only delusions. San would deliberately create gaps with his body language, obligingly inviting assault. It made no sense to his opponents to target anywhere else. In actuality, San was luring an adversary into attacking a zone that he could defend with ease and that allowed him to attack and counterattack without going overboard. It was cunning and really spoke to Uzumaki Naruto's inner prankster. In essence, whether or not you attempted to attack, you were doomed. Given that he made bellies open and extremities vanish, San might as well be brandishing a magic wand from a distance rather than a sword. The feelings of hatred and murderous intent directed at Naruto were nothing new to his mentor San, like a wine connoisseur, was able to distinguish between different kinds of hatred and killing intent after killing enough people and paying enough attention. "You killed my sibling, parent, teammate, squad, lover, get ready to die," was the typical hate speech. The self-destructive, "I hate you so much I'll take you down at the cost of my own life," type was another. Some even seemed too difficult to describe in simple terms, such as, "Fuck you, you fucking a fucker erg." It was strange to note that not all of the rage and hatred that the Uchiha boy felt was aimed at San. The white-haired man in front of him seemed to be representing just the first 3 blocks of a marathon of hate, as if Uchiha Sasuke was preparing for it. As he casually dodged several small fireballs containing shuriken, San couldn't help but feel vaguely insulted. But considering the boy's past, everything made sense. To establish himself as the undisputed king of all psychotic assholes, Uchiha Itachi slaughtered every member of his clan except for his younger brother. It seemed as though the boy had internalized that trauma and hollowed himself out to feel nothing but hatred, even though San acknowledged that he had better reasons than most to hate so intensely despite not being Yamanaka. San had a gut-wrenching suspicion that, if unchecked, this would not end well for Konohagakure or the Uchiha boy. Too many times before, he had witnessed such circumstances. No, this would not work. When Uzumaki Naruto said that he didn't have enough time to even begin making a bowl of instant ramen, he was absolutely right. While an airborne Sasuke was performing an impressive-looking taijutsu maneuver while brandishing fistfuls of kunai, San made his move. The wiry old man merely dodged and cut himself twice to end the fight. Sasuke's eyes and the bridge of his nose were both marked by the first cut. San's final cut went through Sasuke's throat before he could even feel the blood filling his sinuses. San saw the final Uchiha in Konoha clutch his throat helplessly and fall to his knees as if he was trying to force himself to remain conscious, moving again instinctively to avoid the spray of blood. He was unable to be successful at last. Naruto released a breath he had been suppressing without realizing it. The blonde boy walked over to his teammate and tapped his trembling body. "Hey Gramps, aren't you gonna heal him or something? 'Cause he could die, right?" Naruto's voice was clearly worried. Yes, he could," San said, merely observing without offering the Uchiha any assistance. Naruto was not reassured by the older shinobi's response. Old mana. Bits and pieces of Sasuke's life flashed before his eyes. It was filled with small memories he chose to ignore, such as the smell of his mother's hair, a lullaby she would sing, or the evenings when his father would tuck him in after regaling him with tales of valiant ninjas. Some of the memories were rather arbitrary, such as eating breakfast with an aunt whose name he could not quite recall, practicing tag or wooden kunai with his older cousins, or hearing bits of jokes or arguments. He saw moments that he frantically attempted to suppress, such as when he recalled loving and admiring his older brother with the innocence that only a child possessed, and when he witnessed his family members perish in Itachi's genjutsu embrace. The Uchiha then relived a few of his most memorable moments from the previous months and years. He recalled trying to use anger to fill the emptiness he felt inside while ignoring his loneliness. The stream of memories stopped abruptly, and Sasuke thought bitterly, so this is what my life of an Avenger amounts to, not a damn thing. There was a sense of forward motion, but he was no longer flashing through his life as he raced closer. He could make out the silhouettes of his long-lost family members as he was heading toward a light in the distance. They appeared astonished but ecstatic to see him. He heard voices that he hadn't heard in years. He was moving forward, and as their features became more distinct, he could eventually get close enough to touch them if he extended his hand. Then he became conscious, anticipating blood. Sasuke sat up and wiped the liquid from his eyes. His fingertips only showed water, but he felt like a wound from which a scab had been torn. Sasuke was unable to recall the last time he had shed a tear, or even when he had begun to cry. Years seemed to have passed. San's voice sounded gravelly. "That was no genjutsu, boy. That's what happens sometimes when you come awfully close to dying." "Why?" Sasuke asked, on the verge of tears. "I could almost touch them again." San used his forearm to wipe the perspiration from his brow. "If a bone gets broken and doesn't heal right, it'll come out all crooked. Sometimes the answer is to re-break the bone so it can heal proper and turn out stronger than before. People are like bones this way." San fixed a steely-eyed glare on the Uchiha. "If you try to forget and make yourself numb, you will never heal. You'll turn into another walking tragedy in the making, doomed to repeat your past either as a victim again or playing the part of Itachi for someone else." This time, San glanced at both Sasuke and Naruto. "We've all got to learn from the events that hurt us, otherwise we aren't worth a damn in this world." This conversation with Sasuke breaking down and everything made Naruto feel very uneasy. It had never occurred to him that the dark-haired boy would ever look so human despite their lack of friendship. Naruto felt compelled to take action. Naruto offered Sasuke the bowl of instant ramen he had initially made for himself after he had calmed down a bit more. The blonde lied outright, saying, "Take it, I'm not that hungry." With a barely audible mumble, the Uchiha boy accepted the bowl, perhaps as a sign of gratitude. San gave Naruto a nod. "We should head out soon, boy." Sasuke stayed behind to gather his thoughts after San and Naruto left. However, he continued to eat the ramen before it became cold. On the way back to the village, Naruto said, "Yo Gramps, what was that whole thing with Sasuke about? I guess you could call it tough love, in addition to the fact that I've grown soft in my old age." Naruto chuckled and said, "Yeah, soft like cut across the eyes." "I'm serious," San said. "The last person I gave tough love to lost both an arm and an eye permanently. He loved playing the guitar so much that it was a shame if he were good at it. I would almost feel bad, but he was terrible, so I don't." San grinned savagely. Danzo, the leader of the Anbu splinter group route, sneezed violently somewhere in a secret underground bunker beneath Konohagakure, nearly breaking a rib and strewing his meticulously assembled secret documents across the dirt floor. "Erg. Fuck." Danzo bemoaned, losing his arm, and cursed meeting San and Sarutobi as he stooped to gather and organize his documents by himself. With deliberate slowness, Uchiha Sasuke pulled his sword from his older brother's back, thinking that all the training and preparation had finally paid off. As roughly as possible, the youngest Uchiha slid his blade across Itachi's ribs, making the sound of steel scraping bone akin to music to Sasuke's ears, as though Itachi were a violin and his sword a bow. Sasuke wanted to bask in Itachi's suffering, which he saw as a musical note that he wanted to prolong indefinitely, coloring the air and making the world seem rosy. Like everything else, it couldn't go on forever. When his sword was at last free, he decapitated Itachi in one motion, allowing the traitor's head to drop to the ground and his body to slump shortly after. Sasuke, who had exacted revenge on his clan and matched his Mangekyo Sharingan against his brother's, eventually winning, collapsed to his knees, panting. Sasuke experienced an unfamiliar sense of ecstasy. He could now re-establish his clan and turn the Uchiha back into a formidable force. Sasuke's brief moment of tranquility was broken by the sound of derisive laughter. Itachi's red eyes opened even though he was cut off from most of his body. "Little brother, did you think it would be that simple?" On a training ground, Sasuke woke up and tasted blood and dirt. He sat up and used his tongue to gently probe his mouth, revealing some teeth that were just beginning to erupt in bloody gums. What happened to the other guy if he was thrashed this badly? Indeed, he was in perfect condition. He discovered his teacher going over some taijutsu drills with his sparring partner, the person who had mashed him into bean paste. Like a balloon's final breath as it deflates, Sasuke let out a sigh. How did he end up in this situation, a week ago? Gekko Hayate had had to learn patience and vigilance because he had dedicated his life to mastering the art of swordplay despite his ailing health. He was therefore a Junin who was almost never caught off guard, but he squealed like a child when Hitaki Kakashi, dressed in dark blue skirmish armor, fell from his ceiling while he was having his morning coffee. As soon as possible, Hayate tried to hide it by coughing again. The silver-haired Junin did not say whether he was amused. "Kakashi, what the hell? Are we being attacked?" Hayate asked, glancing from side to side and attempting to speak at a level voice so as not to strain himself. Kakashi gave a headshake. "I needed your assistance. I need some help with this." Then, without bothering to activate the weapon sheathed at his back, the armored Junin pulled it back. The reforged white chakra saber that had once belonged to Hitaki Sakumo the White Fang was instantly recognizable to Hayate, a kenjutsu expert and all-around sword enthusiast who had long since worn out his first copy of Famous Swords of the Shinobi World as a child. Sweet, shivering fuck, Hayate's gaze widened. "Is it what I believe it to be?" With a nod, Kakashi gave Hayate the weapon. A dark part of him wanted to take the sword and run away cackling, but the swordsman swallowed his spit after taking a few deep breaths and instead questioned this strange turn of events. He was salivating with the blade in his hands, but he ignored the urge to cradle it to his chest like a mother reunited with her long-lost child. "Well, why are you in need of assistance with this? Have you finally issued a deathmatch challenge to Guy?" Hayate gestured toward Kakashi's attire, that would explain the body armor. The man in the mask gave a headshake. "It's worse than that." The sickly man realized and snapped his fingers. "I have it, Your pawn is being held hostage by one of those swordsmen of the mist, correct? Kakashi let out a groan and fought the impulse to strike Hayate. Words fail to describe just how entirely off the mark you are. Hayate replied with a shrug. So what? Hayate could hardly read Kakashi's lips because of his face mask, which prevented him from speaking. I'm sorry, but I didn't catch that, the swordmaster said without apology. I've got a genin team, Kakashi said in a low voice. The silver-haired man was notoriously close-mouthed when it came to his past, and Hayate had been given hazy impressions of Kakashi's past over the years. Even in Konohagakure, where everyone and their grandmother had a tragic past, Hitaki Kakashi's past was still an ugly clusterfuck of lost parents and teammates. As a result, no one resented Hitaki Kakashi's small orange books or his excruciatingly challenging genin tests. Veteran shinobi were known for having a variety of eccentricities to maintain their sanity. So, is this the purpose of this overkill? How did they get through? Knowing that this would be difficult to live with, Kakashi choked off the first part of a sigh. I had to lose the battle due to my conceit. I was taken by surprise by a group of explosive tags and the most cunning prankster to ever graduate from the academy. For Hayate, the term prankster seemed to speak. Hold on, the kid from Uzumaki? I was unaware that he possessed it. Yep. Hayate whistled quietly. Hayate's only personal experience with the blonde boy was a series of chases in which the Uzumaki child had to be caught after a prank. The word, chase, was a relative one for the sickly shinobi, who disliked long-distance sprinting due to his fragile constitution. He could strut with the best of them, but he didn't run from danger. His skill was in slicing any obstacle in half. His brief pursuits of the Uzumaki prankster were obviously not totally successful. As the silver-haired nin went on, Hayate's thoughts were interrupted. Apparently, he got himself apprenticed to an old-timer, an elite who goes by the name, the Executioner. Kakashi made reference to this in a casual way that was almost too easy to be genuine. The pale complexion of the sickly Junin appeared to worsen, and although he was unaware of the codename, the terms, elite, and old-timer, were not used casually in Konoha, and not by someone of Kakashi's reputation. Sakura Haruno Naruto Uzumaki Sasuke Uchiha. My genin has more potential than I currently realize, and if I want to perform my job effectively, I need to remove the rust. Gecko Hayate gave the chakra blade to its rightful owner after nodding in agreement with Kakashi's assessment. Alright, then let's check out what you have. Kakashi-sensei was starting to turn Haruno Sakura against him. Perhaps even more so than Ino Pig, and not far behind her childhood tormentor Amy. When Team 7 reassembled, she had been lulled into a false sense of security, and Kakashi-sensei actually pledged his best behavior and apologized for underestimating them. Sakura exhaled a sigh of relief, Naruto's fingers twitched towards his sheathed knives, and Sasuke nearly snorted in shock. He appeared alert and professional, a textbook example of a proper shinobi, and Sakura had hoped that perhaps the suicide capsule talk was an anomaly. With a masked smile, the man in light armor offered them all a rematch of sparring, no frills. In an attempt to push him to the limit, Sasuke was the first to accept his offer. The air seemed to be heavy with Kakashi's wave of murderous intent. The masked man blurred, securing Sasuke's arms to a tree with his single blade piercing both of the genin's wrists as he simultaneously drew out a kunai and stopped the Uchiha's charge. She screamed helplessly. Trying to make her way through the Junin's killing intent was like trying to walk through quicksand, and the psychic pressure was making it difficult for her to breathe. It was all too fast for her to make out. The defenseless genin was pinned like a butterfly in an entomologist's exhibit, and the Junin halted at Sasuke's throat with a new kunai. Pleasantly, the Junin said, "Watch and learn." Unlike his last action, which was quick, Kakashi drew his knife with exquisite slowness. Despite his best efforts, Sasuke was unable to hold his frantic hands to his open throat. Sakura was crying because she felt scared and helpless. Sakura was able to move as the air changed once more. She needed to help Sasuke, but where was he? With Kakashi-sensei crouching next to him and his clothing free of bloodstains, the Uchiha was buried in dirt up to his neck. With a pale face, Naruto was by her side, glancing at her out of the corner of his eye in relief. What had he observed? To break the Junin's genjutsu, the blonde had brutally thrust one of his knives through the palm of his left hand. Haruno Sakura continued to hyperventilate, her heart pounding, while Naruto recovered from whatever visions of hell he had seen. She fell to the ground. Their team training had only just begun. The girl with the pink hair had idly hoped that she would be able to become a respectable shinobi with the help of her future Junin sensei. This was not what she had imagined. Over the next few days, Kakashi had focused on her weaknesses, particularly her lack of physical endurance. In order to keep her from being lazy, he began waking her up for leisurely morning jogs, which for Kakashi-sensei apparently meant using a pointed stick to jab between the shoulder blades. Even worse, the masked Junin had cleverly employed a variety of incentives to motivate Sakura, including being pursued by nin dogs, threatening her shiny hair with an unsharpened stick smeared with nin dog droppings, and even using electricity to crackle cattle prod. Whoa! You're a motherfucker. Although Sakura's stamina was greatly improved by these morning jogs, they had no effect on her growing potty mouth. Sometimes his genin were so cute Kakashi grinned at her increasing desire for blood. Sakura, if you've got energy to complain, you have enough energy to jog faster. Sakura, who was reading Psychological Warfare and You by Morino Ibiki and still had P is for poisoning the fuck out of your enemies unopened, would peruse the numerous pamphlets, manuals, and books her sensei would lend her during their occasional breaks. When she wasn't training her body, Kakashi urged her to train her mind. Haruno Sakura had the misfortune of running into Yamanaka Ino one morning after jogging as usual. Ino was looking stunning. Sakura heard a grinding sound and stopped when she recognized it as her teeth. Ino greeted her bluntly, as she always does, "Hello, forehead, you appear awful." In disgust, the blonde girl's nose twitched. "You kind of smell like it, too." Ino laughed for Sakura. The pink-haired girl's fists clenched as the grinding sound reappeared. Because her fucking Junin sensei didn't drag her along on a death march with a stick smeared with dog poop, Ino appeared flawless. The two girls were not prepared for what Sakura did. Sakura merely followed Ino's old advice of putting her forehead to good use by sending it on a trajectory that coincided with the blonde's jaw. Yes, Sakura floored Ino with a headbutt that would have made even the most seasoned professional soccer player wince, and then she followed it up with a kick to a downed Ino's head that would have caused an announcer to yell, "Goal!" if it had been broadcast, as loud as he could. In order to relax, Haruno Sakura inhaled deeply. Perhaps her training was finally paying off. Oh no, was using chakra to blow yourself up really that hard? Uzumaki Naruto, who smelled and felt like he had fallen into a deep fryer, stiffly walked to team training, cursing his slow progress with the Sandame's forbidden technique. Naruto deflected Sasuke's inquisitive look by saying, "Don't ask, you really don't want to know." Either as a petulant child or as a semi-concerned teammate, the Uchiha scowled, though Naruto wasn't sure which at the moment. The Hokage had effectively introduced Naruto to the fundamentals of the actual suicide technique at the beginning of his training session with the Sandame. He needed to learn how to fatally direct all of his chakra to his heart, isolating and condensing it there until everything burst before he could have a reinforced clone perform it. Since the heart was the hub of the chakra circulatory system, pushing chakra in there would cause it to naturally flow out into other parts of the body, which was the challenge in isolating and keeping chakra in a particular location. Because you burned out tenketsu in your chest, it was much simpler to die from chakra exhaustion or induce cardiac arrest. It sounded easy enough. Overload the Deathgate device, and presto. Learning was kind of awful because if he actually did it, he would die, and if he made a mistake, he would get the same outcome without the explosion. Sometimes he gave himself heartburn as if he had eaten too many bowls at Ichiraku's, but he satisfied himself by closing his eyes and feeling the chakra flowing through his chest. He experimented hesitantly with higher chakra levels. Naruto's delicate control was thrown out the window when a child suddenly interrupted the Sandame's instructions with a blunted thrown kunai. This was especially true when the blonde was struck in the face by the incompetently thrown kunai, causing his chakra to surge before releasing, leaving him slightly burned with a few burnt-out tenketsu. Son of a, sensing his age, the Hokage let out a sigh. "Konohamaru, I told you, Toa." Naruto rushed over to the younger boy and put him in a headlock. Interrupting the third Hokage's upcoming lecture, the genin then performed a vicious noogie, rubbing his knuckles back and forth over the top of the brown-haired boy's head. As he observed the antics of those who would eventually take over the stewardship of Konohagakure, the Hokage sighed. Was his grandson's head emitting that smoke from friction, good lord? According to Uzumaki Naruto, that was not one of his proudest moments. 2 days prior to now, Uchiha Sasuke was determined to ask Naruto's teacher for guidance in a composed, even modest, manner. This was what he wanted, and he had days to consider it. Now if he could only find Naruto, Sasuke's search was becoming tedious, and the boy with the whiskers had shown himself surprisingly skilled at fending off assailants. When he eventually located the two at a food stand, contentedly eating, Naruto gave him a suspicious look, and the elderly man reciprocated. Sasuke made his request and almost bowed himself. After giving him a brief look, the elderly man burst out laughing. Deep belly laughter dragged his Uchiha pride face down through a field of rusty barbed wire and ran roughshod over its remnants. According to the elderly man, no, no, and never. Sasuke sensed his old anger rekindling, its embers glowing faintly. Boy, you want to know why? Unconfident in his ability to speak clearly, the Uchiha nodded. Konoha has very little room in your heart. Because of that anger you can get power from someone else, but not from me if you keep your eyes open. There are plenty of other people nearby. Sasuke left, knowing the old man was correct but not wanting to acknowledge it. To decompress, the village's final Uchiha strolled past several training grounds. He found them there, just as he did Naruto and his teacher. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, inhuman blurs that struck with passion and ferocity. Both the student and the master stopped to look at him in their peculiar attire. Gosh! Do you want to train, Uchiha-san? As if he had nothing better to do, Sasuke shrugged. Now in a desperate attempt to evade another Konoha whirlwind from Rock Lee, Sasuke fell to the ground with a lack of grace. The vicious follow-up roundhouse hit him in the face, and he was unable to avoid it. As he bounced and slid along the ground, the Uchiha moaned. Once more was he ever going to win? What the hell? The sound of Madagai's voice was as clear and loud as a temple bell. Please don't give up, Sasuke. You won't ever be fully defeated if you can keep getting back up. After failing, their excitement was contagious. Even though it seemed like a corny adage, the Uchiha resisted smiling. But perhaps Gai-sensei was correct. Despite his ridiculous ass haircut, perhaps a great deal of effort was all he needed.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.